Hey guys, tonight we're travelling back to an era when bedtime wasn't simply about brushing your teeth and scrolling until your eyes surrender. No, if you're a properly behaved Victorian, those pre-sleep hours were their own strange spectacle. From tightened corsets to secret diaries and from hushed footsteps to vinegar nightcaps, every single moment was drenched in customs that feel completely backwards now. You'll be shocked by what they found soothing. Alright, before you settle in too much, go on and hit that like button and subscribe, but only if your gut says absolutely, and drop a comment telling us where you're tuning in from and what hour you're slipping into bed tonight. Turn down the lights, get that fan running for some ambient noise, and let's ease into tonight's little journey. So it all begins in the drawing room. The fireplace still radiates a gentle orange glow. The smell of coal hangs on the velvet drapes, and somebody's dealing a pile of hand-trimmed cards at the edge of the sofa. You're still wearing your dinner attire, your waistcoat rigid, or your dress dragging across the carpet. But your host demands just one quick game before retiring. It's not merely for entertainment, though. Parlour games in Victorian homes aren't the contemporary sort, with blinking lights or playful hints. No, these are sophisticated, socially encoded diversions, created to examine your intelligence, your courage, or your capacity to fake that you're not utterly drained. In certain households, a game called Consequences is extremely popular, where each person writes a sentence of a tale on folded paper, then hands it along. What starts as courteous introductions frequently finishes in wonderfully absurd stories about unlikely weddings and shocking moustaches. In others, you're dragged into something more dramatic. Maybe it's tableau vivant, living pictures where you're instructed to hold still mid-gesture, copying a classical artwork or historical moment, while everyone else guesses what it represents. You've hardly had a chance to process your evening dessert, and suddenly you're imitating the Venus de Milo, using nothing except a cushion and a wrap. Somebody giggles, somebody else fixes your arm position. There's also the minister's cat, a vocabulary game that appears harmless initially. Everyone takes their turn describing the minister's cat with an adjective, beginning with A, then B, then C, until somebody loses track of the alphabet or mistakenly labels the cat revolting. Immediate outrage. But these aren't merely games, they're social evaluations. A single hesitation too lengthy, a badly selected word, a suppressed yawn. That's how rumours start. You notice it in how Mrs. Hemsley lifts an eyebrow when young Mr. Pratt forgets the guidelines. He always was somewhat dull, she murmurs, and now that'll trail him to Sunday supper. You chuckle graciously, cautious not to display teeth. Amusement is acceptable, but too boisterous, and you'll be marked uncultured. Too restrained, and you're frigid. One visitor pats at her brow with a lace cloth, not because she's overheated, but because her hair ointment is starting to liquefy near the fire. Right when you believe you're safe, someone proposes blind man's bluff. You tense. That's the active one. The one where somebody gets blindfolded and fumbles around the space attempting to grab another player by hearing alone. You've witnessed it conclude in catastrophes. Tea tables knocked over, hands mistakenly touched where they shouldn't be, or even worse, somebody tumbling into the potted plant. And yet here arrives the blindfold. You slip away just barely. The host claps her palms and announces 10 o'clock, time to settle down. And with that, everyone starts the ceremonial withdrawal toward the upstairs corridor. You're relieved, but also conscious the night has only truly started. The drawing room empties like a gradual, graceful tide pulling back. You're standing there gripping your gloves, questioning if you succeeded at tonight's silent tests. Were you clever but not foolish, attentive but not intrusive? And did you handle to laugh without exposing anything genuinely human? The hostess snuffs the final lamp with a soft click of the brass extinguisher. The glow of the flames fades to a murmur. Up the staircase you climb, surrounded by the groan of buffed banisters and the whisper of skirts brushing wallpaper that hasn't been replaced since before the trains came to town. You're not completely alone. Ahead of you, one of the visitors is grumbling, something about a charade that went overboard. Evidently somebody performed Romeo and Juliet slightly too persuasively last week, and it sparked a small domestic controversy. Behind you, the ever-reliable maid trails at a courteous distance, carrying a warming pan in one hand and your prepared nightclothes in the other. But your thoughts are still in the drawing room. What is it about these diversions that make you feel like you've just endured an examination rather than a party? There's something profoundly Victorian about it. Even recreation is a show, and even shows are about control. You remember a magazine snippet somebody once recited aloud during supper. It suggested that games like Pass the Slipper were intended to teach elegant hiding of the hands, and the laughing game, where one participant must not grin while others attempt to provoke them, was excellent practice for self-discipline. It all clicks now. These aren't simply pastimes. They're practice sessions for maturity, for suppers with associates, for supervising servants without appearing harsh, for hosting visitors without exposing the weariness sewn into your bones. The Victorians were perpetually obsessed with regulations, and what better moment to strengthen them than when you're already partially surrendering? You arrive at the landing and peek back at the drawing room, now darkened. One cushion still shows the impression of where you perched. A card rests abandoned near the piano leg, and in the stillness you contemplate the one game you were thankful they didn't recommend tonight. Forfeit. That one's treacherous. In forfeits, you must surrender a personal belonging, your glove, your watch chain, even your handkerchief, and execute a challenge to reclaim it. A dance, a verse, a secret whispered quietly to the assembly. It appears innocent until somebody challenges you to declare who you most respect in the room, or even worse, to imitate them. You've witnessed reputations damaged, romances derailed, and once, just once, an engagement accelerated after an excessively candid forfeit challenge, all before sleeping hours. You locate your door and enter inside. Behind you, the maid nods silently and vanishes down the narrow servant staircase. You shut the door softly. The floor is unsteady under your stockings. The lamp wavers low outside. The town is silent, but your brain is still completely alert, cycling through every statement you made, every look traded, every unwritten rule you might have violated. Welcome to Victorian sleeping hours, where even your recreation is threaded with lace and slumber has to stand in line. You ignite the bedside lamp with a precise flick of the taper, protecting the flame with your hand like you've observed the housekeeper do countless times. The match sizzles, the oil glows golden, and your silhouette springs to life against the wallpaper roses. You've fled the drawing room, endured the ordeal of social diversions, and now, at last, it's time to ready yourself for sleep. Or so you assumed, because in a Victorian residence, sleeping hours aren't simply about sliding under the covers. It starts with what can only be called a very deliberate, very awkward struggle with hygiene. The washstand sits in the corner like it's observing you. It's ceramic, slightly fractured at the edge and filled with tepid water that's turned cold since the maid filled it earlier. There is no basin, no flowing tap, no privacy screen, just a chipped jug, a meagre towel, and a cake of soap so parched it could carve initials into glass. You strip your outer clothing piece by piece, not completely naturally. Victorians regard total nakedness in the bedroom something to be prevented unless you're in hospital or have very particular directions from your physician. So you maintain your chemise on, roll up your sleeves and grab for the sponge. Yes, the sponge. Not a plush, gentle sea sponge. This one is coarse and smells vaguely of carbolic. Submerging it into the water, you attempt to disregard the sharp intake that leaves your lips when the chill strikes your skin. You pat, not rub, at the standard areas: underarms, throat, hands, and perhaps your feet if you're feeling adventurous. Cleansing the face is completed last, almost ritualistically. You can't spray too liberally or drip on the carpet. Victorian washrooms are a privilege reserved for the ridiculously prosperous. For you, This porcelain stand and the pitcher alongside it are the nightly ceremony. And the water? It was probably carried upstairs in buckets, one level at a time, by a young scullery maid with muscles like steel. You attempt not to dwell on that. When you eventually towel dry, you don't feel cleansed so much as compliant. You've satisfied the nightly requirement. It's not about ease. It's about discipline, arrangement, and observable exertion. You raise the chamber pot's porcelain cover with the edge of your fingertips. It rests underneath a humble wooden seat disguised with flowered cloth, an effort at refinement, though nobody is genuinely deceived. You sit carefully, knees locked together, gaze directed ahead, wishing nobody detects the slight clink of porcelain underneath you. There's no toilet, no pipes, just the same vessel that's been utilised since before supper, and which somebody will drain in the morning. And yes, it smells precisely as you'd anticipate. This is part of the Victorian sleeping rituals, cloaked in courtesy, even when there's nothing courteous about them. You replace the cover and push the pot back into position. Acting like this never occurred, you glimpse your reflection in the looking glass. Ashen, somewhat moist, a bit unkempt. But to the Victorian perception, this is bedtime attractiveness. Not radiant skin or silky garments, but a correctly executed procedure. You've bathed in your manner. You've utilised the chamber pot discreetly, and now you're prepared for the next phase, dressing for slumber. You move away from the stand, towel hanging over your shoulder like a prizefighter in a corset. The atmosphere in your chamber has chilled, not from any circulation naturally, but simply because the flames in the hearth were never sparked. Tonight, coal is costly, and heat is not a nightly assurance. Your sleepwear is waiting, arranged with meticulous precision on the edge of your seat, a linen chemise, a cotton robe, and, if the weather demands it, a pair of woolen sleeping socks. And a flannel hat that appears suspiciously like it previously belonged to your grandfather. You draw the chemise over your head, smoothing the material with your hands. It's stiffer than you'd prefer, starched from last week's washing and secured at the neckline with a ribbon that somehow always tangles in your hair. Sleepwear in the Victorian period is not fashioned for comfort. It's constructed for propriety, warmth and endurance, especially in residences where morning ice appears on the interior of the windows. Once clothed, you encounter a small but daily predicament. What to do with a now soggy towel and sponge? There's no washing chute, no basket. You hang them over the rear of the seat, thoughtfully arranged so they don't leak on the carpet. The sponge returns in its stand like a miserable sea animal destined to be utilised again tomorrow, and the towel is positioned to air dry beside the hearth that isn't burning. The next phase, hair. Victorian hairstyles aren't merely ornamental, they're structural. For women, this means lengthy, frequently dense hair that has been secured, plaited and greased into position since sunrise. For men, it's smoothed centre, parted and brushed with exactness. But at night, everything must be thoroughly unravelled and then instantly redone in a more appropriate fashion for sleeping. You perch at your vanity table and commence the nightly ceremony, removing one hairpin after another. There are scores, potentially thousands, each one extracted with a small tug, a small exhale. When your hair ultimately tumbles around your shoulders, there's a moment of comfort, swiftly followed by obligation. Now arrives the brushing, and yes, it must be 100 strokes. You recall this regulation from youth, when your governess cautioned that if you didn't brush meticulously, your hair would develop in twisted. You've never determined what that signified, but the statement has troubled you enough to continue brushing ever since. You work from tips to roots, cautious not to catch, cautious not to lose strands. Stray hairs are regarded as unattractive and are to be gathered, twisted into neat spheres and discarded carefully, or added to a hair collector jar on your dresser. You've learned of girls accumulating enough to craft jewellery. By the moment you're finished, your arm throbs. Your hair is plaited loosely, treated with castor or rosemary and covered in a soft material to shield the pillowcase. You peer down at your hands, parched, reddened, knuckled, somewhat split from the soap. You massage a bit of lanolin on them, the scent pungent and ovine, then slip on a pair of cotton gloves intended to maintain feminine delicacy. This, too, is part of nightly choreography. You don't simply wash up. You suit up. You aren't heading to sleep. You're stepping into a hallowed interval between display and obligation, enclosed in fabric and regulations. Now completely readied, you perch briefly on the border of your bed. Not in it. Not yet. There are still 2 phases to complete. A final survey around the chamber and the formal entry into the oddest bed you've ever encountered. The bed looms, towering and motionless, like a vessel in harbour. It rises nearly to your waistline, demanding either a small wooden step or an awkward leap to mount. You choose the step tonight, positioning one foot deliberately on its weathered platform and seizing the bedpost for stability. The bed structure is sculpted from mahogany or walnut, dark, lustrous and unnecessarily frightening. Every surface shimmers with wax, but no degree of shine diminishes the sheer mass of it. This isn't simply a place to rest. It's a piece of construction. 4 posts ascend like pillars from the edges, hung in thick drapes of brocade or damask. You draw one back carefully and look inside. The area within the bed is confined. A bit too confined, maybe. The drapes are pulled not merely for beauty, but for warmth and discretion. Heat is valuable. Privacy even more so once you're inside and the drapes are shut. You are concealed from sight, though not necessarily from noise. Victorian partitions are delicate. The mattress is packed with feathers, but years of usage have given it an erratic geography. There's a slight depression in the centre where generations of bodies have rested, and subtle rustling noises when you press your palm down. You've learned rumours of mattresses filled with horsehair, seaweed, or even moss. In less privileged homes, feather filling is a treasure, though it has its peculiarities. Occasionally, a pointed quill chooses to poke through. And then there are the linens. Linen, obviously. Washed rigid and bleached pale, they're frigid to the touch. Not cool, glacial. You flinch slightly as you peel them back. The chamber might not feel terrible with your sleepwear on, but those linens have been lying motionless for hours. Fortunately, someone's positioned a bed warmer under the blankets. A long-handled pan with smouldering coals inside swept between the linens before your entrance. The aroma of metal and charred cotton still hovers. You extract it cautiously and place it on the hearth tile to cool. Nobody wants to duplicate what occurred to Cousin Edith last Christmas when the bed warmer spilled and burned the entire bottom of the coverlet. The needlework never recovered. Slipping into bed is a challenge requiring both courage and method. You climb in gradually like a soldier penetrating hostile ground. Knees first, then elbow, then a full-bodied glide into the depression. The linens grip not from dampness, but from the sheer resistance of starched fabric and flannel nightwear. Once in arrangement, you pull the heavy coverlet up to your jaw and reach for the drapes, drawing them shut around you with a soft swoosh. Immediately, the atmosphere transforms. It's dimmer, yes, but also more muffled. The drapes soften the noises of the residents, the groan of the stairs, the vibration of a window pane, the breeze brushing against slate rooftops. It's like being inside a cushioned compartment. You attempt not to contemplate the reality that dust accumulates up here more than anywhere else. The trim on the canopy above you trembles slightly with each respiration, and somewhere, possibly in the footboard, you detect a subtle scurry, a rodent, an insect. You wish it's just the breeze. And naturally, this is when the genuine discomfort starts. You're in bed, but you can't shift much. The layers are weighty, the atmosphere dense, and you're beginning to recognise you might have overdressed. You adjust slightly, just a fraction, to ease the tension on your hip and instantly regret it. The mass of the blankets repositions like a hesitant landslide, trapping you with flannel dominance. There are at minimum 4: the bottom linen, the top linen, a wool covering, and a gigantic coverlet that feels like it was stitched with stones. And somewhere inside all this, you're perspiring. Victorian beds are not designed for ventilation. Between the dense drapes, the woolen socks, and the full-length nightdress fastened to your neck, it's like resting inside a flask. And yet heaven forbid you rest with your arms outside the blankets. That's practically unseemly. And worse, somebody might assume you're developing a chill. You can't resist but look at the embroidered pillow alongside you. It's flatter than anticipated. Victorian pillows frequently are, and smells faintly of lavender pouches and starch. Some residences stuff them with horsehair for rigidity, though yours is thankfully made of down. Still, it's bumpy, like somebody attempted to conceal a handful of marbles inside. You tug the blankets under your jaw and try to settle. The bed doesn't precisely invite repose. It's a stronghold, a cocoon, a small plush cell. Victorians didn't view the bedroom as a refuge. It was a place of purpose, not luxury. You're here to rest, not to relax, and rest must be achieved, not pampered. This mentality explains plenty about your current situation. You're technically in bed, but the procedure feels incomplete, like you overlooked a phase or forgot a task. You contemplate that one button left unfastened on your chemise. Did anyone observe? Will your maid repair it in the morning? Or will it be recorded in some invisible ledger of criticism? It's no surprise so many Victorians lie awake not with spiralling thoughts, but with the constriction of regulations woven into every corner of their existence, even their bed linens. Still, you attempt to make yourself comfortable. You extend one leg only to collide with a surprisingly heated object at the bottom of the bed. You halt, but then you recollect it's a bed brick. A small wrapped ceramic block heated earlier and placed under the blankets before you came upstairs. The warmth has almost vanished, but it's still heated enough to warm your toes. You nudge it back into position with gratitude, a small blessing. Some residences use hot water bottles instead, made of metal or rubber. Some people opt to wrap a hot potato in a cloth, intending to eat it with breakfast the following morning. There's a persistent story about certain eccentric households who heat a ceramic tile and keep it in bed as if it were a small, warm companion. The Victorians were certainly imaginative, if not always prioritising practicality. Your gaze drifts along the decorative fringe of the bed's canopy. A tassel hangs motionless above your head, resembling a velvet teardrop. You let out a quiet breath and your muscles finally begin to relax their tension. The mattress may feel uncomfortably firm and the sheets may resist folding, but for this brief moment you have found a quiet repose. Sleep is slow to arrive, but in a life governed by such rigid schedules, simply lying down correctly counts as a small victory. The last light from the oil lamp disappears behind the curtain, and you are completely surrounded by the stillness of the Victorian night. Except, of course, you are not entirely by yourself, because somewhere just outside your bedroom door, or perhaps tucked right behind it, a silent presence waits. Not a supernatural being, not a lingering memory, but a domestic worker. Specifically your maid, who is sleeping curled up nearby, never distant enough to achieve true rest, and never close enough to be visible unless called upon. She has her own nightly routine, far simpler than yours, yet equally bound by household regulations. After assisting you out of your daytime attire and into your night clothes, brushing your hair, retrieving your personal brush, and providing the bed warmer, she vanished down the main hall toward her own assigned space in the house. Or more accurately, to her niche within the house, because the servants of the Victorian era do not possess true bedrooms in the way you understand them. If luck is on her side, she has a cramped attic corner under the sloping roof, a small space with a low ceiling and a worn fabric sheet in place of a proper door. However, it is more probable that she is resting in a repurposed linen closet on a temporary cot pushed next to the kitchen area, or possibly on a mattress rolled out from beneath the main staircase. Some residences even featured custom-built bed-in-a-drawer mechanisms, actual sliding compartments beneath stair landings or between storage closets where a servant could be neatly put away like a stored blanket, out of direct view, yet always readily available. The physical design of the house mirrors the societal values of the period, making the hierarchy literally concrete. Your chamber is spacious, filled with ample furnishings and air. Her space is functional, enclosed, portable, and sparsely appointed. If you activate the bell pull next to your bed, a hidden wire connected to the servants' quarters below will immediately vibrate, startling her awake with a loud jolt, no matter how soundly she may be sleeping. Not that she ever sleeps soundly. She is trained not to, because the nighttime hours do not belong to her. Even now, as you get comfortable beneath your quilt, she is likely completing her own brief nightly preparation, perhaps wiping her face with a damp rag that has been dipped in recycled bath water, or neatly folding the last of your freshly cleaned linens before positioning her work boots just so beneath her narrow cot. The background noise of the Victorian night is not absolute silence, but soft, muted activity emanating from behind the walls. A slightly shifting floorboard, the sound of a cupboard opening, the quiet thud of someone kneeling to tend a dying fireplace or setting out kindling in readiness for the morning. You can sense it even from your secure haven of sheets. The division between your private life and the public workings of the house is blurred by ceaseless routine. Your maid may be absent from sight for most of the day, but she is never truly distant. She is aware if you prefer sleeping on your left or right side. She knows if your socks require mending. She sees the single hair left on your pillowcase, the page corner folded in your journal, the unnoticed crease in your dress hem. And in a peculiar way, this close awareness is reciprocal. You have witnessed her yawn during the pre-dawn hours, rub her wrist after carrying heavy water buckets, and adjust her collar even when she believes no one is watching. In this residence right now, you share a quiet closeness. Two individuals concluding their day in parallel, each secluded in different parts of the same nighttime environment. You remain in the darkness, partially enveloped by your bedclothes, merely listening, just observing the quiet. There is something strangely reassuring in the knowledge that your maid is only a bell pull away. Not that you would use it, certainly not unless something genuinely essential arose, like a misplaced shawl or a particularly bothersome cool breeze penetrating the window frame. Still, the simple fact of her presence softens the profound silence, but beneath this surface comfort lies an unspoken reality. Victorian slumber relies entirely on someone else's wakefulness. For you to feel warm, someone had to have lit the fireplace earlier and consistently maintained the coals. For your morning wash basin to be ready precisely on time, someone had to boil the water, haul it up 2 flights of stairs and manage not to spill a single drop on the stair runner. Even your pillow, with its slightly awkward stuffing and mild lavender scent, was smoothed and lightly scented by hands more worn than your own. And those same hands are now folded beneath a thin coverlet somewhere beyond the pantry door. You sometimes wonder what she dreams about, or if she has any time for dreams at all. She likely sleeps in the same undergarments she wore while scrubbing the stairs, wrapped in a simple shawl that retains the faint odour of floor wax and harsh lye soap. There is no silver-handled hairbrush, no fancy embroidered slippers, only a hard palette, a short stub of an oil lamp, and perhaps a small biscuit secretly saved from the kitchen shelf. However, she's not the only one. The house pulses with the activity of other quiet figures at this hour, a hidden workforce of light sleepers, each connected to the comfort of someone else. There is the butler who checks the exterior locks, the footman who ensures the rear entrance is secured, the cook's young assistant who prepares the oats for the morning meal. They glide like spectres through the passages, but unlike spectres, they carry pails and wipe down surfaces. Meanwhile, high above them you rest in a pampered state, simply expected to enjoy peaceful sleep. You are meant to pretend these working lives cease to exist after sunset, that everything completely stops once the gas lamps are lowered, that the entire household is resting from attic to cellar. But naturally, it is not, and perhaps that is precisely why you are still awake. You raise yourself slightly, peering through a small opening in the canopy curtain. The light in the hallway has been turned down to a faint glow, the kind of illumination that transforms decorative brass into dark silhouettes. You see no movement, but you can feel its lingering presence, like a recent memory of motion. It is a peculiar way to coexist, this shared night. A closeness without communication, a complete reliance without any direct recognition. And yet you recognize her way of walking. You can identify the sound of her breathing when she quietly folds laundry before dawn. You observe her, though seldom fully, in the small, consistent details, the way the edge of the large rug is always perfectly straight, or how your brush is positioned exactly where your hand anticipates finding it. In a subtle way, this is her room also. Just as the house itself never truly stops functioning, neither do its deeply ingrained customs. Your period of rest is framed by the labour of another, and as you finally begin to drift into sleep, you are aware, perhaps more strongly than before, of the complex system of invisible effort that made this moment of tranquility possible. You sigh, your cheek now warmed by the edge of the pillow. You will not ring the bell tonight, but knowing it is there offers a measure of comfort, a sense of not being completely alone. Some beds gently welcome you. Victorian beds present a challenge. You have been tucked in, cleaned up, layered with clothing and wraps, and essentially loosely swaddled, like a proper adult ready for storage. And now, as your vision adjusts to the folds of the canopy and your body settles into the mattress's ridges and valleys, you are left with the final and strangest part of bedtime, physically navigating the bed itself. It is not plush. It is not resilient. It does not embrace or conform to you. Instead, it imposes structure, demanding good posture, a firmness that compels you to consider your bearing, your life choices, and whether your shoulder blade is directly poking into a stray feather. Victorian beds are not identical, but they share certain peculiarities. For example, they are frequently set surprisingly high off the floor, a tradition carried over from earlier eras, when raising the bed was thought to provide protection from drafts, rodents, and the unnamed dangers that might crawl along the floorboards at night. The consequence? You do not simply enter the bed, you must ascend into it, like royalty or an extremely fatigued mountain climber. And once you are inside, the act of getting out again is an entirely separate endeavour. There is no simple rolling to the edge for a late-night trip to the washroom. That is the function of the chamber pot, discreetly concealed under the bed, mere inches from your very costly lace-edged nightgown. But the bed is still not finished challenging you. The heavy curtains drawn tightly around the frame were never purely for decoration. They fulfill multiple needs, trapping warmth inside, providing privacy in rooms that might be shared, and muffling the many noises of a creaking wooden structure. Yet once fully closed, the curtains entirely transform your environment. The air within grows still and dense. The combined scent of wool, dried lavender and polished wood surrounds you like an extra blanket. You cannot see any moonlight. You can barely hear anything from the world outside the heavy fabric barrier. The mattress gives a faint creak with every breath you take, a subtle reminder that this bed, like the rest of the house, possesses a palpable sense of life. Some beds creak more loudly than others. You have heard stories of beds that groan so aggressively on windy evenings that they wake everyone on the floor. Others are almost perfectly silent, so silent that you begin to believe you have slipped into an alternate reality altogether. You are unsure which sensation is worse. And then there is the peculiar question of what is actually used to stuff the mattress. In your situation, you are fortunate it is filled with feathers, although they have clumped and shifted over the years, forming strange bumps and depressions. However, other beds, even in respectable homes, are filled with less luxurious materials: horsehair, dried straw, coconut husks, or, in the countryside, dried ferns and hay. Some mixtures even include cut-up rags to soften the overall feeling. Every so often you hear of someone discovering a long-lost comb, a broken locket, or a small child's marble hidden deep inside their mattress. This is bedtime archaeology, Victorian style. You shift your position once more, attempting to find a spot that cradles your body instead of prodding it. Your foot lightly touches the edge of the frame, cold iron or carved wood, depending on what the season required, and you quickly pull it back. The many layers of sheets and blankets may successfully trap your body heat, but they cannot shield you from the unexpected chill that seeps in at the corners. And so you lie there, your arms tucked in, your collar fastened, your stockings pulled up, listening to the subtle sounds of the mattress, the faint rustle of the curtains, and the quiet shuffling of the house continuing its own agenda without you. Because even when you are in bed during the Victorian era, you are never truly at rest. You adjust your pillow, patting it flat with one hand while trying to avoid disrupting the fragile stack of all the other coverings pressing down on you. There is a specific technique required for managing the Victorian bed. Once you are in it, you cannot toss or turn freely, not with the tightly folded hospital corners or the stiff nightclothes binding you like a gentle penalty. And if you do somehow manage to change your position, you will most likely just create a new wrinkle in the sheet that will irritate you for the following hour. You attempt to turn onto your side, but the feather-filled mattress does not respond well to movement. It shifts unevenly beneath your hip like a small boat carrying too much weight on one side. The curtain right next to your face moves faintly as your breath gently pushes against the heavy fabric. And just like that, you are intensely aware that you are confined, layered, swaddled, sealed in. You could pull back the curtain, but that would allow the cold air inside, and the night air seems to carry its own hushed criticisms. So you remain in your small fabric enclosure, adjusting by tiny increments, not large movements. You cannot help but contemplate how peculiar the Victorian concept of comfort truly is. Everything about this bed is a direct contradiction. It is tall and grand, yet structurally weak in its joints. It is described as soft, but stiff to the touch. It is intended to shield you from the outside world, yet it somehow feels as if it is judging you as well. Still, there are minor benefits if you know where to look. The warming pan you put aside earlier has left a faint line of residual heat near your ankles, and the heavy counterpane, despite all its unnecessary stitching and lace trim, retains heat like a fortification wall. You reach down to check that the bed brick is still warm, only a slight heat remaining now, carefully wrapped in a sock to prevent it from burning your feet. It is not elegant, but it is effective. Some households even sleep with heated stones wrapped in old newspaper or soft flannel, pieces that have been passed down for generations like treasured objects. You once heard a story that someone tucked a hot potato into their foot coverings at night, intending to fry it for breakfast the next morning. Efficient, if a bit unappetizing. You wonder if the pillow will ever cease smelling strongly of laundry starch and lavender sachet. You wonder if you will ever stop noticing how firmly the bed curtains wrap around the corners of the mattress, creating what feels like a velvet-lined box. You wonder what the actual time is, and whether that subtle, distant creak from the hallway signifies that someone else is still awake, struggling with their own fortress of bedding. Victorian beds, you realise, are not merely places for sleeping. They are declarations. They communicate something about your social standing, your household's rigorous standards, and your understanding of the proper procedures for preparing for rest. They are meant to impress visiting relatives, to assure your in-laws that you were properly raised, to keep dust off your face and uphold moral standards. You finally settle completely, hands folded, eyes closed, your feet positioned straight and slightly separated, as if posture remains vital even in sleep. And just before sleep starts to touch the edge of your consciousness, you suddenly recall that you neglected to fully air out the bedclothes this morning, and someone definitely must have noticed. You sigh, not out of true disappointment, but with the quiet, weary acceptance of someone who knows that even while resting, the expected performance must continue. You are nearly drifting off, half asleep in your personal enclosure of flannel and feathers, when the faintest clicking noise stirs you awake. It is not loud, not a cause for alarm, just the barely audible sound of metal sliding into its locked position. That is the latch on the narrow servants' stairwell just past your door. You recognize it because you have heard it many times before. It is the route the maid uses for her final inspection pass through the upper rooms. She is not here seeking conversation or even explicitly to check on your well-being, but merely to gather anything that needs removal. Perhaps she will collect the used, damp towels from your washstand, or note which rooms will require a fresh fire to be started in the morning. Sometimes she simply pauses briefly to listen, confirming that everything is quiet and settled. You feign sleep, not because it is strictly mandatory, but because it is the expectation. In a Victorian household, the hours following bedtime are not truly yours. They belong to the house, and the house never fully stops functioning. Your thoughts turn to the cramped spaces designated specifically for the staff. The servants' stairs, steep and purely functional, concealed behind panelling or hidden behind doors that always make a slightly too loud squeak. Unlike the main staircase with its shiny banister and portrait of Great-Uncle Horace, these back stairways are bare wood, worn smooth by countless hurried journeys. No carpet, no polish, just the unseen, vital infrastructure of the house. You imagine your maid descending now, the weak light of her candle held low to prevent waking anyone. She is probably carrying the day's laundry bundle under one arm, her other hand trailing along the wall for stability. By this time, she has already spent 14 hours moving, folding, dusting, lifting, pouring, fetching, and her night's duties are not yet finished. You think again about where she will ultimately sleep. Perhaps in the tiny sliver of attic space above the scullery, under a blanket thin enough to be folded into a napkin. Or in a renovated cupboard like the one you once saw during a summer visit to your aunt's home, just wide enough for a small cot and a trunk with a dangling piece of string connected to a bell pull. She might even be sleeping in the bed recess built right into the wall of the main laundry room, behind a sheer curtain that barely keeps out the drafts. These kinds of recesses were common in Victorian homes, particularly for housemaids who were expected to rise before the family. They are designed for quick access, not comfort. You recall once in the winter noticing frost on the inside of the pantry window. It had formed during the night, etching delicate, spiralling patterns across the glass. You had stood there, momentarily fascinated. Your maid, standing just behind you, had said absolutely nothing, but you understood later that she had probably spent the entire night sleeping directly beneath that very window. And yet, she was still up before daybreak, starting the kitchen range. The Victorian house at night is much more than mere furniture and social rules. It is a constantly moving ecosystem built upon the unnoticed effort of unseen hands. The beds are warm because someone woke up early. The wash basin is full because someone carried the heavy weight. Even your hairbrush, perfectly placed, is the result of consistent habits you never observe. The quiet, rigorous discipline of those who live between the calls of the bell. You turn slightly onto your side, one arm sliding out from under the heavy counterpane. The room is tranquil, yet not silent. A faint scraping sound, the soft creak of a floorboard far away. Somewhere a drawer opens and then quietly closes. The night proceeds with its silent, detailed choreography. You are still half listening to the house continue its rhythm without you, those subtle changes behind the walls, beneath the stairs, when you suddenly remember something odd. Once, during a visit to your cousin's city townhouse, you woke up to find the fire already blazing, the curtains already pulled open, and a warm cloth neatly folded beside your pillow, all without ever seeing anyone enter the room. It is the peculiar, invisible magic of a well-run Victorian household. Unseen labour, timed with absolute perfection. It is also the specific reason why so many servants sleep in close proximity to their employers, sometimes even within the bedroom itself. You have heard of households where a junior maid sleeps on a small cot positioned at the foot of the bed. Others roll narrow truckle beds, which are thin wooden frames on wheels, out from beneath the master's bed frame at night, then quickly tuck them back under before the sun rises. Some rooms even include built-in servant alcoves. Tiny half-rooms separated by a curtain no wider than a clothes wardrobe. The main purpose is proximity, efficiency, the quiet assurance that someone is always near, just not near enough to be truly noticed. In more affluent homes, the valet or the lady's maid might retire to a private designated servant's bedroom close by. But even then, the door is always left slightly ajar, or the bell pull string is coiled neatly next to the bed. Sleep is conditional, a light rest that can be easily interrupted by the demands of duty. Your own maid is sleeping just across the hall, you assume, or perhaps in the narrow cupboard behind the linen storage. You are not absolutely sure. You have never actually asked. It would feel strange to ask, not necessarily impolite, but improper, as if acknowledging her rest somehow suggests she is not entitled to it, and yet you are acutely aware of her schedule. You know she wakes before the sky has lightened, that she moves without shoes so that the hallway floor will not echo, that she warms her hands over the kettle before she begins lacing your corset. These are facts you learn not from talking, but through predictable patterns, quiet presence, and silence. There is a specific kind of stillness in this shared nighttime, a moment where two lives briefly exist side by side, separated only by a wall, yet with vastly different daily routines. You are securely tucked into pressed linens, sinking into a mattress designed for impressive display. She's likely curled up, hugging her knees beneath a thin, scratchy wool blanket, her ears constantly listening for footsteps from overhead. You are both breathing the same chilly air. You wonder, and it is not the first time, how frequently she lies awake thinking about you. Not you as a person, but you as a collection of required tasks. A head of hair to brush, a garment to stiffen with starch, a bell to answer. You realise with a sense of discomfort that in her own dreams, you probably appear only as a list of action words. You shift in the bed again, moving more carefully this time, not to find your own comfort, but as if to avoid disturbing someone through the floor below. It is a strange form of empathy, this nighttime awareness, the quiet guilt of being able to rest only because someone else is unable to. Eventually your thoughts return to your own world, your own minor worries. The correspondence you forgot to reply to, the new gloves that pinch your fingers, the side table drawer that has started to stick again. Small, entirely manageable concerns. But even now, as your body starts to relax, you hear one final distant sound, a faint metallic clinking, perhaps a kettle lid, perhaps the warming pan being emptied of coals. Then, finally, silence. And that is when you know the house is completely still. You believe your duties for the night are over. You have washed, changed, climbed, adjusted, listened, and at last you have begun to settle into the rigid embrace of your Victorian mattress. But just as your breathing starts to deepen and your limbs feel heavier beneath the counterpane, you recall that you forgot your nightcap. And no, not the velvet tasselled cotton sleeping hat hanging uselessly on the bedpost. You are not that old-fashioned, not yet. What you forgot is the necessary drink, because in a Victorian household, bedtime is rarely a dry affair. You gently grope for the tray on your bedside table. It is there, precisely where your maid placed it, a small ceramic pitcher, a narrow drinking glass, and next to them a faint smell of something sharp, herbal, and slightly acidic. Tonight's beverage is a vinegar cordial infused with cloves. You frown even before you pick up the lid. Victorian nightcaps are not the inviting mugs of hot cocoa that modern people imagine. They range from simply odd to frankly alarming. Some families swear by warm milk with a pinch of nutmeg. Others prefer strongly bitter concoctions made from gentian root or rhubarb, supposedly intended to balance the body's humours. There is even a common remedy made of lemon juice, thick molasses and cayenne pepper meant to clear the lungs, stimulate digestion, and possibly even strip paint from walls. And then, of course, there is sherry, a reasonably safe choice, though slightly disapproved of for unmarried women or those under 30. Nevertheless, a small serving of sweetened wine before bed is hardly scandalous, and most households indulge in it discreetly. You once stayed with a cousin where everyone received a small measure of port in matching etched glasses every night, delivered on a silver tray by a footman who knocked once and strictly avoided making eye contact. You remember thinking it seemed both strangely elegant and coldly clinical. Tonight's vinegar mixture, however, is far less elegant and much more aggressive. You take a small, hesitant sip. It tastes distinctly like pickled flame. Your eyes water slightly, but apparently it helps to prevent night vapours, whatever those may be. A clipping from a magazine tucked into your diary once promised that such tonics would strengthen the nerves and keep melancholy away from the sleeping chamber. You are not sure about your nerves, but the sheer intensity of the flavour has certainly jolted you back into full wakefulness. Some people insist on spoonfuls of thick treacle. Others consume drops of tincture of valerian or even raw garlic syrup. There is a rumour circulating in town that the ironmonger's wife drinks onion water right before bed and has avoided catching a head cold for 12 years. You would much prefer to risk the cold. Still, you cannot help but appreciate the ritualistic quality of it. There is something comforting in the consistent sight of the tray, the glass, the peculiar taste. It marks a clear division. Day transitions into night. Action gives way to stillness. It is less about genuine pleasure and more about necessary punctuation. You carefully place the empty glass back on the tray, making sure not to produce a clinking sound. The flavour lingers on your tongue like an unanswered question. You settle back against your pillow, a wave of warmth spreading slowly and stubbornly down your chest. And now perhaps, you are finally ready to sleep. But even as your body starts to give way, your mind begins to wander toward the other kind of nightcap, the one you did not drink, the one your cousin mentioned once in a hushed confession during a summer visit. The small bottle kept in a locked compartment, the one she referred to as the sleep syrup. You never actually asked what it contained. You sink deeper into the pillow. The taste of that clove vinegar nightcap is still an unpleasant tingle at the back of your throat. It is not enjoyable, but it is familiar. And in a Victorian bedroom, familiarity is valued more highly than flavour. You stare up at the canopy above you. The decorative fringe sways ever so slightly with your breath, and for a long moment, that terrible little sip starts to have its intended effect. Your muscles feel less like taut wires, your jaw releases its tension, your toes stop curling in protest against the cold. Yet, not everyone in your social circle is as devoted to vinegar and milk. Some quietly, very carefully prefer something with a little more strength. You think once more of your cousin's whispered sleep syrup, the bottle she kept wrapped in an old stocking, concealed inside her embroidery basket. It was neither wine nor cordial, but some strange mixture she purchased from a travelling apothecary. It was in a brown glass bottle, had no label, and smelled only faintly of overripe roses and anise. She claimed she only took it when her days were especially stressful, or when the house was particularly noisy or unsettlingly quiet. You remember her expression the next morning? Still, a little too pale, not exactly unhappy, but simply detached. Of course, you would never consider touching anything like that. Your house is respectable. You drink your vinegar, you warm your feet, and you fall asleep the traditional way. Slowly, deliberately, by following one rule after another. Still, as your fingers find the edge of the counterpane and tuck it more precisely beneath your arm, you know that Victorian bedtime drinks take on many different forms. Your neighbour, the sharp old widow with the painful knees, insists on a heated mug of beef tea, salty, rich, more of a broth than a beverage. The doctor who treats your father keeps a small flask of what he calls a restorative tonic that smells suspiciously like gin mixed with cough syrup. Even your former governess once admitted to secretly adding a small splash of bitters into her tea before retiring. She claimed it was for better digestion, but the way she said it made you wonder what deeper discomfort she was trying to mask. Some drinks are purely traditional, others are an attempt at escape. You gently shift your weight and glance towards the bedside table. The tray remains quiet, its contents already settled into their overnight positions. The glass has been rinsed, the jug is capped, the small cloth napkin folded with a precise neatness that only someone wearing stiff sleeves would bother with. All around you, the room maintains its silent, established routine. The walls do not creak, the curtains do not flutter. The house has finally settled into its deepest rhythm. And now so do you. Your stomach feels just a little warm, not from pleasure, not from indulgence, but from the sense of completion. The drink was not enjoyable, it was not even comforting, but it was expected, and in this social environment that is frequently enough. As your eyelids begin to close, you briefly consider what beverages await you tomorrow. Perhaps something milder, perhaps something sweet, but most likely the same as always: vinegar, cloves, and a steady, waiting hand to prepare the tray. Because Victorian rest does not come from passive stillness, it comes from predictable repetition. You would assume the lights simply go out, and that is the end of the day. But in a Victorian home, turning off the lights is a whole performance, particularly when those light sources involve open flames and complex mechanisms. Your lamp is burning low on the nightstand, its flame diminishing with the lust of the oil. It is tempting to simply blow it out like a birthday candle, but that would be terribly careless. You reach for the brass snuffer, which is shaped like a miniature bell on a hinged stand. Every household possesses one. Some are highly decorated with engraved handles and little ornamental feet. Yours is simpler, yet still dignified. You slowly lower the cone over the flame, listening for that slight sigh, the soft sound of the lamp surrendering to the darkness. That moment, oddly delicate, always feels like a ceremony. And just like that, your room is enveloped in shadow, with only the faint gleam of the hallway gaslight seeping through the thin space beneath the door. But the truly important task is not extinguishing the flame. It is ensuring that nothing accidentally reignites in the dead of the night. Fire in the Victorian era is both a necessity and a very real threat. It warms the sitting room. It heats the water for your tea. It illuminates your reading corner. But it also hides in chimney flues, lingers behind coal grates, and spreads far too easily across thin muslin curtains. You reluctantly get out of bed, your socks scraping on the cold floorboards, to perform your final safety inspection. The coals in the bedroom grate have already faded to a dull glow, their edges barely visible like distant embers. You poke them once with the long iron tongs for good measure, just to be certain no rogue spark is planning mischief. Some households cover their grates with slightly damp cloths or metal shields before bed, a precaution learned from someone else's tragic story. Then you check the window latch. Is it completely secured? Not because you fear thieves, but because a night breeze might move the drapes too close to a stray candle, or worse, allow a sudden gust of air into the chimney and send ashes fluttering out like fireflies. Your eyes scan the floor quickly. Nothing combustible is near the hearth. The The bed curtains are securely tied back far enough. The warming pan is cool to the touch, resting safely on the slate tile. You even touch the top of the oil lamp, confirming it is no longer hot. It is a meticulous dance between finding comfort and maintaining constant caution. You are not paranoid, you are simply well trained. Every person in the city has heard the terrifying accounts. Rows of houses burned to the ground, an entire block suffocated in smoke because someone fell asleep with the grate uncovered. Besides, your dressing gown is made of fine brushed cotton and your bed canopy is heavy velvet. You have personally witnessed how quickly both can ignite during a simple hearth cleaning. You climb back into bed, your body immediately reminded of its former warmth. But now your eyes are wide open again, energized from the full circuit you just completed. You pull the covers tightly and take one last look at the faint light struggling under the door. The house appears quiet, subdued, but you know the truth. In a Victorian night, the fire may sleep, but it always sleeps lightly. You settle back beneath the layers of blankets, but your mind has not yet followed suit. There is a persistent thrumming in your chest, a nervous energy left over from all that checking and rechecking. A Victorian bedtime leaves little room for impulse, and even sleep itself must be earned through a vigilant set of rituals. You shift onto your side. The pillow remains cool where you have not touched it, and the faint smell of scorched coal hovers near the curtain's edge, blending seamlessly into the room's atmosphere. Somewhere deep within the structure of the house, a floorboard lets out a soft sigh. You tell yourself it is merely the old timber adjusting to the cooling temperature. Yet, a part of your attention remains fixed on the dark, empty hearth across the room. The grate is black now, barely visible in the dim light, but your ears are listening for that tiny crackle or pop, the warning sound that something, somewhere, is still faintly smouldering. Some households sleep with a full bucket of sand or water nearby just in case. Others place a heavy cast-iron fender directly in front of the grate, not for ornamentation, but as a genuine barrier. You once heard of a family that left a pot of cooking flour on the mantelpiece, entirely convinced it would somehow smother an accidental flame faster than any person could react. Flour. As if fire follows the rules of baking. You try to laugh quietly to yourself, but your throat feels dry. You reach again for the jug on your side table, taking great care not to knock anything over. The water is tepid now, and the ceramic cup has a chip on its rim, but you drink it anyway. Even that small action feels like it must be executed neatly, correctly, without spilling a drop. No one is physically watching you, but you have lived with these exacting rules long enough that they have become internalized observers. You set the cup down and stare up at the ceiling. In some homes, people sleep with a small handbell next to the bed, intended not just for summoning the maid, but for sounding an immediate alarm. Fires move incredibly fast in connected row houses. A dropped candle in one room can result in a neighbourhood catastrophe by dawn. And yet, despite all this ingrained caution, the house feels secure now. Not because it inherently is. Houses of this era are constructed from dry wood, layered cloth, and sustained by open flames, but because you have performed everything you were expected to do. You have adhered to the protocol. You have completed the nightly dance. And in the Victorian world, performance itself serves as protection. The curtains are drawn, the gas has been extinguished, the warming pan is cool, the bell pull cord lies motionless at your bedside. And the house is finally truly quiet. You sink back into your pillow, a little less stiffly this time. Your eyelids grow heavy, your breathing evens out. And as your senses start to merge with the onset of slumber, one final consideration drifts gently through your awareness. Tomorrow night, you will perform the whole sequence once more. The washing with the sponge, the medicinal cordial, the careful brushing of your hair, the inspection of the embers. Not for comfort, but because it is mandatory. And in a society defined by strictness, even rest must be achieved through multiple steps. The chamber is quiet, the fire is low. The evening drink has been consumed long ago. And just as you finally start to sink toward rest, truly sinking, you recall one thing you neglected to record in your journal. You let out a quiet sigh, scarcely heard even by yourself, and feel around for the slender booklet kept within your nightstand drawer. It is small, merely a hand-sized volume wrapped in old leather with a metal clasp that makes a quiet snap as it opens. The writing implement is already there, its tip shielded by absorbent paper. This is all part of the process, because in the Victorian era, retiring without documenting the day feels unfinished, like exiting a room without closing the entrance. You push up onto your elbows and angle the book to catch the last faint light coming from the lamp in the passage. The pages are off-white and lightly ruled. Your script is so compact and flowing that even you struggle to decipher it later. Copperplate style is sophisticated, certainly, but it's also quite a burden when you are half asleep. Still, you write. Not everything, naturally. You have mastered the art of glossing over certain facts. Today's entry might mention the drawing room game was lively, but not that Mr. Wexley sat excessively close on the small seat. It will state that the vinegar cordial was invigorating, not that it nearly made you cough. It might even reference the foot warmer without admitting the burn mark left near your ankle, because diaries are not only private, they are, oddly enough, a form of presentation. They serve as the final spectator, the ritual curtain call after the show concludes. You sometimes write in the third person, or in a sort of shorthand. A particular expression might denote disappointment. A series of initials could imply a disagreement. A single mark in the page's corner means the maid left your hairbrush misplaced. 2 marks mean you noticed and chose not to speak. You once saw your aunt's journal. She organised hers with different coloured ink powders, sepia for irritation, purple for unexpected events, crimson for reverence. She called it emotional mapping. You regard it as too much trouble. Yet there is something calming about the movement of the pen across the paper, the scrape of the metal point, the way a phrase curves and finds its place. It is calmer than speaking and somehow more genuine. You pause to contemplate, the nib resting lightly above the sheet. What will the next day bring? Perhaps the wash? A visit from your relative? A letter that requires an answer? You quickly note a reminder in the border. Examine glove compartment, left thumb area worn thin. Then you close the book. The clasp shuts with a quiet click. The day has been chronicled, however indirectly, and with that, the last necessary task is complete. You place the diary back in its compartment, not under the stack of linen where it might tempt the maid's curiosity, but just below your nightly reading material. Easy to retrieve, simple to conceal. You lie down again, your eyes now heavier. The bed, although firm, no longer feels unwelcoming. It has taken you in the manner of Victorian items, not warmly, but dutifully. You rest back, feeling content, the slight aroma of ink still on your fingers. There's a tiny smudge of blue on your thumbnail, just beneath the edge. Proof it is finished. Proof that the day has, in the most Victorian sense possible, been properly concluded. Not with passion, not with defiance, but with precise writing and careful handwriting. Outside your bed hangings, the dwelling has become utterly silent. The fire is gone, the lights are dimmed, and the passage used by the staff has quieted. But even in this stillness, you cannot help but wonder how many others are writing right now too. Because keeping a diary is not just something you choose to do. It is what everyone around you does, in some fashion. Your older brother records his food consumption and his temperature daily, convinced it will reveal something medically important. Your neighbour writes down how many times her dog sneezed. The family nearby keeps a log of how many guests smiled during the evening meal, silently judged and tallied later. There is, you suspect, a compelling desire among Victorians to measure life, to capture it in ink before it vanishes. not because they fear forgetting, but because they fear living incorrectly. A journal is not simply a record, it is an account book, and you are both the keeper and the content. You once read an essay recommending young women to record their evening condition, a daily summary of the state of one's spirit, clothing, and digestion. You are uncertain which of those was considered most important, but, for now, you have only captured fragments. The sensation of your fingers slipping on the medicinal bottle, the way the bed curtains seem to hold your breath like a separate set of lungs, the way Mr. Wexley's gaze lingered half a second longer than was proper. Nothing offensive, nothing untrue, just enough, always just enough. You gently shift, closing the diary drawer with the side of your hand. It bumps with a quiet finality. The room welcomes the stillness again. You know the maid will find your blotting paper in the morning and replace it without a comment. The pen will be cleaned, the diary undisturbed. And yet she will know, without ever reading a word, what sort of evening you experienced, because Victorian residences are built on signs, hints, and remnants, and the inhabitants within them become experts at interpreting the unspoken. Your pillow feels warmer now. The bed has ceased resisting your form. You can feel the cloth settling into your shape, the mattress accepting your weight with faint, acknowledging creaks. Outside, the wind shifts, a window covering rustles, but you are now a part of the night. The writing, the review, the settlement is complete, and with that, the only remaining task is the most challenging one of all, releasing the day. The diary is put away, the lamp is cold, and the house has adopted a disciplined kind of silence, the sort that wraps around you like a thick woolen blanket, comforting, but difficult to breathe beneath. You lie motionless, but stillness in a Victorian bed is never quite the same as ease. Part of the discomfort comes from what you are wearing. The long garment, for a start, is not the soft cotton creation modern dreamers imagine. It is stiff with starch, buttoned high up the neck, and heavy enough to function as a drape. Your cuffs are gathered at the wrists with small pearl buttons, charming in daylight, impressive, impossible to undo without assistance. You attempted once to sleep with them undone, but the cuffs fluttered about all night like insect wings. Never again. And then there are the wool stockings. Thick wool, homemade, irritating in that particular way that makes your ankles itch, just thinking about them. But you would not dare take them off, not only because the floor is cold, but because sleeping without them feels vaguely rebellious. If you are exceptionally proper or there is company in the house, you might also wear a dressing gown, a kind of padded outer garment worn over your nightdress, quilted, tied with ribbon, and slightly absurd. It is not for sleeping, but for being seen right before bed. You once wore yours to answer a knock at the door and spent the following week fending off compliments that were somehow insults in disguise. So modest, they declared with smiles, too polite. The final accessory, a hairnet or sleep cap, not for warmth, but to keep your carefully brushed and oiled hair from tangling against the linen pillow. This cap never stays in place correctly. It slides backward by daybreak, but without it, your morning ritual will take twice as long and require twice the effort. So you rest there, covered, socked, collared, and enclosed. You are not in pyjamas. You are in defensive sleepwear designed to protect your reputation, your well-being, and your hairstyle. You wiggle one toe and feel the wool rub against your foot. Your arms lie stiffly against your sides, the sleeves making a soft noise with each minimal movement. There is a sense of constraint that settles over you, not only physical but emotional. In the Victorian perspective, sleep was not meant to be a luxury. It was useful. It was restorative. It was earned through cleanliness, order, and self-control. A person who slept soundly was a person of clear conscience and strong morals. A person who was restless too much. Well, that suggested worry, a lack of determination, perhaps even poor digestion. So you do not thrash, you do not sigh, you do not throw the coverlet aside and declare your misery. You lie still, because that is the appearance of sleep. Even if your shoulder aches, even if your ribs feel pinched from the corset you only partially loosened, even if your feet are getting too warm in their woolen prisons. Stillness is part of the uniform, and tonight you are completely outfitted for the role. Your body accepts the stillness, but your mind is less compliant. It wanders now, not in dreams, but in small pieces, half-thoughts, caught between corset seams and collar fastenings. And every time you try to drift off, you are reminded, somewhere, somehow, of one more detail you forgot. Was it the window latch? Did you invert your stockings before placing them in the soiled laundry? Did you leave your gloves too close to the fireplace? Sleep approaches slowly when you are dressed for propriety and thinking in lists. Your collar is a little too high, your elbows squeezed by the nightgown seam. And while you yearn to push the coverlet back, you know doing so would violate the unwritten code. Endure silently. Victorian sleep is not supposed to be about indulgence or enjoyment. It is about formality and utility, like everything else. Even the furnishings agree. Your bed, though large, is not designed for sprawling onto. It is for entering correctly. Sitting, turning, lying down, folding hands. The entire process resembles a ceremony more than a respite, and the notion of relaxing completely is unimaginable. No one lies diagonally. No one throws off the sheets. You once heard a story of a young woman who tangled her quilt during the night and was subsequently sent to a corrective sleep therapist. Or perhaps it was merely a very severe relative. You shift minimally. The cap slides forward onto your forehead. You raise one hand, push it back, and instantly regret the movement. Now the sheets have creases. You feel them bunching under your hip like a reproach. Some people claim that Victorian nightwear improves posture during sleep. The high collars supposedly train the neck to remain straight. The long sleeves keep arms close to the body, and the buttoned cuffs prevent excessive movement. You cannot confirm whether that is accurate, but your back certainly feels straight, painfully so. Then there is the warmth. The stockings have become foot-sized ovens. Your shift holds a heat that is more stifling than soothing, but you do not remove them because that is not the accepted behaviour. You close your eyes again. Think of the morning ritual. The cold floor, the basin of cool water, the corset to be laced, the hair to be unwound and brushed again. Sleep is intended to carry you to those things, to prepare you, not release you. Rest is a tool, not a reward. You cannot help but be amazed at how much effort has gone into merely being horizontal. How a bed meant to provide softness instead dictates behaviour. How a nightgown meant to offer comfort instead disciplines. And yet, here you are, wrapped, warm, observed by no one, and yet following every rule. Stillness returns, one breath, then another. Eventually your limbs begin to relent, the collar ceases to irritate. The stockings become a faint sensation. The creases smooth themselves out. Sleep arrives not with celebration, but with compliance, not of ease, but of tradition. You do not sleep despite the attire. You sleep because of it, because every button, every seam, every quiet discomfort reminds you that you are doing things correctly. And in the Victorian world, sometimes that is all the permission you require to rest. The house is absolutely quiet now. No shifting wooden planks, no kettle lids clanking in the washing area, no creak from the servant's route. Even the wind has stopped testing the window latch. You might assume this is finally your signal to surrender to sleep. But in a Victorian dwelling, silence is not merely anticipated, it is enforced. It begins precisely at 10 o'clock. Earlier, in stricter homes, it is the unstated restriction on sound. From that moment onward, voices must be lowered to whispers. Piano lids are closed, boots are removed at the entrance. Even coughing is best done quietly, perhaps into a piece of cloth in the passage. Noise, after all, is not just bothersome, it is morally questionable. Victorians believed that calmness reflected internal order. A noisy house was considered a chaotic one, and chaos implied weakness, or worse, poor upbringing. So families trained themselves to walk in soft-soled slippers, to close compartments without slamming, to hold their breath when climbing stairs late at night. You once visited a friend's home where even the dog wore soft coverings on its paws. Inside your own room, you feel this expectation permeate the walls. The heavy bed hangings help absorb the rustle of your sheets. Even your breathing feels like it should be tidied up, kept consistent, polite, untroubled. You once sneezed in the middle of the night and startled not just yourself but the maid sleeping 2 rooms away. She appeared with a shawl and a small bottle of medicinal vapour before you had even finished apologising. And then there is the matter of the ticking timepieces. Every room in the house has one. Mantel clocks, portable watches, ornamental timepieces housed in glass enclosures. Each one ticks on its own schedule, some louder than others. At night, those ticks seem to grow. You hear the one on your small chest of drawers, precise and somewhat insistent. From down the corridor comes the slower grandfather clock, its deep click like a pulse in the flooring. Together they create a peculiar kind of melody. Not a gentle song, more like a timing device of constraint. You are trained to fall asleep to this rhythm, never to a gentle song or a story before bed. Those were for the young. Adults learn to sleep to the sound of barely audible discipline. A neighbour once admitted she could not sleep without the hallway clock ticking. It reassured her that time was passing, that everything was still in its rightful place. When the clock stopped one night, just a wound-down mechanism, she remained awake until morning, convinced something awful had occurred. You do not blame her, because in the quiet of this hour, every sound or lack of it signifies something. A creak is suspicion. A thump is a failure. A whisper might indicate curiosity or even improper behaviour. And silence. Silence is a declaration. You lie there, adjusting your breathing to the clock on your small chest of drawers. Tick, breathe in. Tick, breathe out. You once read that female factory workers did the same thing with the noise of the machinery during their brief rest periods. It trained the body to rest in harmony with its surroundings. It is a strange, unconscious form of compliance. But tonight the rhythm works. The quiet is not empty. It is organised, it is refined, and within its influence you find yourself slowly relaxing. Your eyes are closed now, but your ears remain vigilant, trained by years of expectation to react not to sudden noises, but to their absence. There is a saying you once overheard at an evening gathering, spoken with gentle amusement by an older relative. We train our young women to sleep quietly, so that if they ever make a sound, it must be because of something serious. Everyone chuckled softly. You did not. You had understood too well. Victorian quietude is not just a matter of good manners. It is a social cue. Those who sleep silently are considered composed, reliable, trustworthy. The kind of person who could be given charge of the valuable objects or a relative's private matter. Those who murmur in their sleep, toss, sigh, or forbid it, grind their teeth. They are subtly marked as people to be observed. You once shared a room with a distant relation for a summer. She kicked the covers off every night and mumbled into her pillow like a character in a stage play mid-speech. The housekeeper noted it once quietly while serving tea. By the week's end, your cousin had been relocated to a room further down the passage, nearer to the laundry and farther from the reception room. She never mentioned it, but she folded her napkin too tightly at breakfast for the remainder of the season. That was when you first grasped the Victorian principle. Noise has consequences. It is why everything in your room is designed to absorb sound. Heavy floor coverings, thick drapes, velvety coverings. Even the wallpaper, once damp with adhesive, seems to absorb your breath like a cloth. Your door does not latch loudly. Your personal container lid fits securely. The very walls seem to participate in your silence. And yet, ironically, it is the smallest sounds that begin to provide reassurance now. A faint creak from the passage, the familiar soft whir of the grandfather clock as it gets ready to mark the hour, the distant quiet sweep of the maid's skirt as she puts out the final gaslight in the rear stairwell. You recognize these sounds. They are part of the arrangement. They do not bother you. They steady you. Because, in a Victorian night, true calm is not found in complete stillness. It is found in the deliberate, intentional quiet, where everything has its designated spot. Every footstep is muffled. Every breath is measured. You rest there, aligning your breathing to the clock on your small chest of drawers. Tick, breathe in. Tick, breathe out. You once read that female factory workers did the same with the machine noise during their 10-minute rest breaks. It trains the body to rest in harmony with its surroundings. It is a strange, subconscious kind of compliance. But tonight the rhythm succeeds. The quiet is not empty. It is organized. It is refined. And within its hold, you find yourself slowly giving way. Your eyes are closed now, but your ears remain attentive, trained by years of expectation to react not to sudden sounds, but to their absence. There is a saying you once overheard at an evening meal, spoken with pleased pride by an older relative. We train our young women to sleep quietly, so that if they ever make a sound, it must be for something serious. Everyone had a gentle laugh. You did not. You had understood too well. Victorian quietude is not merely a matter of good manners. It is a social statement. Those who sleep without making a sound are considered composed, trustworthy, dependable, the kind of person who could be trusted with the key collection or a relative's secret. Those who talk in their sleep, toss, sigh, or, forbid it, grind their teeth. They are subtly marked as people to be watched. You once shared a chamber with a distant relative for a summer. She kicked the covers off every night and muttered into her pillow like a dramatic character mid-speech. The housekeeper noted it once quietly while serving tea. By the end of the week, your cousin had been moved to a room further down the passage, closer to the washing area and farther from the main reception room. She never said anything, but she folded her napkin too tightly at breakfast for the remainder of the season. That was when you first grasped the Victorian rule. Noise has consequences. It is why everything in your room is intended to absorb sound. Heavy carpets, thick drapes, velvety coverings. Even the wallpaper, once damp with glue, seems to absorb your breath like a sponge. Your door does not latch loudly. Your personal container lid fits securely. The very walls seem to cooperate in your silence. And yet, ironically, it is the smallest sounds that start to comfort you now. A faint creak from the passage. The familiar soft whir of the grandfather clock as it gets ready to chime the hour. The distant quiet swish of the maid's clothes as she puts out the final gaslight in the rear stairwell. You recognize these sounds. They are part of the established order. They do not bother you. They anchor you. Because in a Victorian night, true peace is not found in complete stillness. It is found in the deliberate, intentional quiet where everything has a location, every footstep is muffled, every breath is measured. You breathe out once, slowly, the kind of breath that releases the last bit of resistance. Your fingers loosen their hold on the coverlet. Your legs stop bracing against the coolness, and just as your mind begins to finally wander, the grandfather clock strikes. 12. Not with a loud noise, not with drama, just a firm, measured gong. 1, 2, 3. Each chime like the final punctuation at the end of a long, very strictly written sentence. 12. Midnight. You lie still, not out of stiffness now, but because stillness has finally become natural. The house does not applaud you, it simply continues. And now, at last, you continue with it. Midnight has passed, but your body does not notice. It is too wrapped in wool, routine, and the soft rhythms of quiet. Still, something in the room feels different, not colder, not louder, just changed. You look toward the chair in the corner, where your morning gown hangs neatly over the back. Something about the way the material folds reminds you that you were supposed to change into the morning wrapper tonight, not because of sorrow, not because anyone has died, but because someone in the household is absent, travelling unexpectedly, gone to recover, or perhaps simply delayed by bad weather and transport. And in the Victorian world, absence carries significance. It leaves an impression, and that impression affects even the smallest things, like your nightwear. You neglected to change, and now, wrapped in your usual cotton gown, you feel strangely overdressed and under-observant at the same time. There is no manual that demands this change, but the household expectations are clear when a member of the family is away, especially without a definite return. Those remaining are expected to reflect a trace of that absence in their routine, quieter conversation, subtler colours, even when appropriate, the substitution of regular sleep clothes for darker tones. Your morning nightdress is nothing fancy, just a dark grey version of your usual garment with a plainer neckline and black ribbon at the cuffs. The wrapper that goes over it is trimmed in black edging, the pockets lined with grey silk. These clothes are not sad, they are symbolic. They communicate that someone is missing, and we acknowledge it. You sit up slightly and look down at the bed, unsure whether to rise and change. But the warmth is too strong. The weight of your blankets, too compelling. You stay still, choosing instead to mark the moment internally. In some homes, families keep morning slippers by the bedside, soft-soled black velvet worn only during times of absence or quiet reflection. Others light a lamp in the passage and place a scarf over the shade, dimming its brightness until the traveller returns. These actions are not grand, but they are deeply noticed. You remember when your older brother first left for boarding school, your mother changed into her grey dressing gown for 3 nights, even though no one mentioned it aloud. You remember the silence at the evening meal, the way the housekeeper set one less place at the table, but still smoothed the cloth where his plate would have been. Even sleep adjusted. The clocks were wound more quietly. The footsteps on the stairs were softer. Conversations shifted away from cheerfulness and toward neutral ground. Even the drawing room games became subdued, as though laughter could upset the balance. Now, as you lie in your regular bedclothes, you feel like you have violated something minor. Not a rule, but a pattern. Still, you whisper the person's name in your mind just once, just enough to acknowledge, and then you close your eyes. The house does not punish you, but you know it observed. You lie still now, wrapped in the wrong nightdress, half covered in the right intent. The grey wrapper remains folded in the storage unit. The black ribbon remains untouched. But even so, the sentiment lingers, not in what you wore, but in what you remembered too late. That, perhaps, is the very core of Victorian life. Not always doing the right thing, but being constantly aware of what the right thing would have been. Mourning in the Victorian era is not just for the deceased. It seeps into the everyday, quietly colouring the hours when someone is simply not present. A missed meal, a journey delayed, a letter left unanswered. These absences are not ignored. They are honoured in small, intentional ways, through posture, through silence, through the softening of one's voice while brushing one's hair. Even dreams change during these times, or at least you are told they do. Some believe that when someone you care for is far from home, your sleep becomes more delicate, more prone to waking, more vivid in imagery, as if the mind itself is reaching across distance to communicate, I remember. I still shape my life around your form, even while you're gone. You once heard of a woman who slept on only one side of her bed whenever her sister was travelling. Not because she expected her to return that night, but because it felt disloyal to occupy the space fully without her. The maids noticed, of course, the bed was easier to prepare. You think now of the space next to you, unused, untouched, Not because someone sleeps there when present, but because that half of the bed feels more like an empty space, a blank area for someone not here, but not forgotten. The house senses these things, you are certain of it. The passage sounds quieter. The servants tread on the stairs more softly. The ticking of the clock seems more thoughtful, less demanding. The fireplace was left unlit tonight, not out of forgetfulness, but out of awareness. Warmth can sometimes feel like too strong a statement. Victorian morning is not always draped in dark veils or locked rooms. Sometimes it is a missed conversation, a quieter good night, a deliberate choice not to smile too broadly in the mirror. You turn gently onto your side, pulling the covers with you. Your legs shift inside their woolen socks. The sleeve of your nightgown pulls slightly at your shoulder. You wish, just briefly, that you had been thoughtful enough to put on the grey one. But perhaps remembering is enough. Your eyes begin to close again, not with guilt, but with understanding. This is part of the evening now, this soft, shadowed space between being present and being absent. And in a few days, when the person returns, everything will resume. The lighter gown, the fuller evening meal conversation, the usual firmness in your pillow. But tonight, the silence means something. And though you are not dressed in mourning, your sleep will reflect it well. Sleep plays with you now, close enough to touch, but just evasive enough to remain out of reach, and you suspect it has less to do with your nightdress or the sock slowly making your feet hot, and more to do with something far stranger, the way you are lying. Because in Victorian bedrooms, even your sleep posture comes with expectations. You shift slightly, laying flat onto your back, then hesitate. Sleeping on your back is acceptable, formal even, but only if your hands are folded neatly over your stomach. Any looser and you risk appearing sloppy, or worse, unladylike. You try your side. That is often suggested in health guides, especially the left side, supposedly better for digestion. But then again, the family doctor once said, sleeping on one's left could encourage a bad temperament, whatever that means. You pull your knees in slightly, then recall reading somewhere that a curled position in adults suggests a disorganized mind. Even while unconscious, your body is being judged, if not by others, then by rules deeply ingrained in the culture. Some women are taught to sleep flat, with their chins slightly raised so their jawlines remain elegant. Others use extra pillows to lift their heads, convinced it prevents wrinkles or improves the skin tone. You once stayed with a cousin who tied a silk ribbon under her chin every night to refine her jaw while sleeping. You are not sure it worked, but she married well, so perhaps that was not the point. And then there is the pillow itself. Too high and your neck cramps, too low and your face presses into fabric saturated with hair oil and starch. You fluff it just enough to balance your ears, but not so much that it messes up your hairstyle. A minor compromise, one of hundreds. You think just briefly about your maid. Does she endure this? Does she lie awake worrying about her wrist position? Or how her hair might crease against her cheek? Or does she collapse onto her narrow bed like a coat falling to the floor, too tired to care? You envy that in a quiet, forbidden way. You once dared to sleep on your stomach during an illness when you could not tolerate the pressure on your ribs. The next morning, your governess raised a disapproving eyebrow and said it was the posture of animals. You have never done it since, even in the privacy of your own bed. Posture is a display, but display is safety. In this world, you are what you seem to be, even asleep. So you settle back onto your side, knees carefully spaced, arms crossed gently at the waist, like a painting, like someone preparing to be remembered correctly. You sigh, not from exhaustion, but from tension, slowly releasing under the weight of familiarity. This is the way you have slept for years, not the way your body wants to, perhaps, but the way it knows how. Outside the window, a breeze brushes against the glass. You do not open your eyes. You do not move. The moment passes. And now, just maybe, sleep will finally take the shape it is supposed to. You lie there, arranged, more than relaxed, in the officially approved Victorian sleep position, side-lying, modest, motionless. The bed does not soften with time, but your body finally stops fighting it. Sleep seems nearer now, and yet one last hurdle remains: your dreams. Because even those in this strange and proper world are subject to expectation and belief. Victorians did not believe dreams were just fleeting thoughts. They were prophecies, warnings, reflections of one's mental and moral condition. You were brought up on the idea that what visited you at night was determined by how you behaved during the day. What you ate, what you said, whether you had spoken too harshly or held in a sneeze for too long. You glanced toward your pillow. Underneath it, just barely visible, is a small pouch of rosemary and dried mint, not placed there by chance. You tucked it in 2 nights ago after reading that rosemary prevents improper dreams and improves mental clarity during rest. You are not sure what that means exactly, but the aroma is comforting, and it has become part of your nightly environment. Your aunt relies on lavender for good dreams, and your sister once tried violets, though they caused a skin irritation. You even heard a rumour whispered during a social gathering that some young women sleep with iron keys under their pillow to prevent dreams entirely. Others tuck notes beneath the mattress to guide the mind, written hopes, warnings, or even the name of a person they hope to see in sleep. As a child, you once tried to dream about a boy in town by placing his name under your sheet. You dreamt of the delivery man instead. You never tried again. Now you are more careful. You think thoroughly before bed. What images might appear? Have you cleansed your mind? Properly avoided romantic novels in the evening? Maintained an orderly routine? Because dreams can be discussed at breakfast, and they are over buttered bread and jam. Someone will always say, "I had the most strange dream." And within moments, it becomes a group discussion. "Fish mean a change," says one. "No, fish mean sickness," says another. "Did you see a staircase? A dog? Were you descending or ascending?" They treat it like mathematics. But more dangerously, a misunderstood dream could damage your reputation longer than a mistake at dinner. You have trained yourself to forget most of yours, or at least to recall them only in vague impressions. That way, when someone asks, you can say nothing memorable and truly mean it, or at least sound like you do. Still, there is a nervous feeling in your chest tonight, a suspicion that your mind might have its own agenda. Rosemary pouch or not, your limbs finally relax. The heat from the bed has built into a kind of heavy enclosure. The wool socks no longer irritate. The collar of your nightgown stops tugging. The house's silence becomes less noticeable, more normal. The clock ticks quieter. Now that all required actions are finished, your eyes close naturally. If you happen to dream, let the visions be short. Let them be straightforward. Allow them to drift away like mist over your pillow, leaving no impression. And if sleep remains perfectly blank, that may be the best outcome. Your heavy eyelids begin to settle. The bed, although firm, no longer feels like a point of contention. The mattress has become an expected support rather than an absolute barrier. Your awareness starts to soften, but you do not fully surrender because you still have a task to complete, not the personal journal that is already put away. This volume is the acceptable literature for the night, a book carefully selected, judged for its moral soundness, its mild emotional tone, and its social acceptability. It lies on your bedside table now, the ribbon marking the page tucked precisely at chapter 6. You reach for it slowly, taking care not to disrupt the bedclothes. The edge of the counterpane gives slightly as you turn. There is no actual ease in this motion, but in this proper world, obligation outweighs comfort, even during downtime. Tonight's chosen reading is The Minister's Daughters of Swansley Vale, a story focused on modesty, self-denial, and a subtle romantic disappointment. You have read it previously. Everyone has. It is designed to be consumed in measured parts, a few pages at a time, to avoid any undue mental stimulation before sleep. Victorian reading before bed follows strict guidelines. Emotion is permitted, but it must be heavily moderated. Light-heartedness is acceptable, but only if it is formal and educational. Adventure is too stimulating. Horror is improper. Poetry is fine, if sufficiently abstract. You once secretly read a serialized story, a wild tale of pirates and a brave governess, and the excitement kept you awake for days. Your governess discovered it and exchanged it for devotional verse. You open to the correct page and begin reading. The sentences are long, elaborate, and full of unnecessary punctuation. The main character, Miss Clarabelle, is wrestling with a choice between duty and a minor attachment. Once again, the language layers upon itself like decorative lace. Pleasant, but entirely anticipated, and that is the whole purpose. This is not reading for excitement or discovery. It is reading as a fixed habit. It is something to neatly conclude your day, a gentle slide from wakefulness into approved fantasy. You are not seeking a surprise. You are seeking to be confirmed in your place in the established order, your place in the household, your place in your own bed. You read 2 pages, then 3. Your vision begins to blur, not because the narrative is poor, but because it is performing its function well. The pace of the words starts to mirror the steady rhythm of the house, proper, predictable, slightly monotonous and completely secure. You allow the book to drop, closing with a quiet sound, not thrown, not simply dropped, but released. And as you place it back on the nightstand, ribbon replaced, corners lined up, you feel, for the first time this evening, something resembling completion. The room is precisely as it should be. The lamp is extinguished, the embers are cold, the servant bell cord is motionless, and now even your thoughts are arranged neatly, like trim lace. Sleep is waiting politely at the doorway. All it needs is your agreement. The book sits next to you now, its spine straight and undisturbed. You have read just enough to satisfy the requirements, not enough to awaken your mind, not enough to leave a definite memory. Victorian reading at night is not about intellectual pleasure. It is about confirmation, about softening the day's sharp edges and directing the mind toward appropriate thoughts. If the characters are reserved, so will you be. If their reasoning is measured, yours will follow suit. You settle deeper into the blankets, the printed words still briefly visible behind your eyes, like the afterimage of a candle flame. Miss Clarabelle has again refused a marriage proposal, not due to any dislike, but because she is uncertain if she is too fond of sunsets. You will read the subsequent chapter tomorrow and discover that almost nothing has changed. But that is the essential point. In a life this controlled, change is best delivered in tiny doses. Not everyone, however, adheres to the established reading list. You once found your cousin reading a book with no listed author, its cover wrapped in brown paper. She insisted it was just a diversion, but she blushed deeply when she said it. When you later quickly scanned the book in secret, it was full of dramatic gazes, fainting spells, and characters who used excessive emphasis. You were unable to sleep for hours afterward, not from a sense of impropriety, but from the overwhelming thought that people might be thinking that way right before bed. Your governess enforced a regulation. No fiction after 8 in the evening. She claimed it overheated the brain and made dreams disorganized. She preferred household instruction manuals and travel descriptions, both so packed with detail that the action of reading became the same as nodding off. And yet, in spite of everything, you occasionally wish for a different kind of book. Something unfamiliar, something imaginative, something with collapsing staircases and cryptic notes slipped beneath locked doors. You once saw a copy of Frankenstein in a shop window, but you quickly walked past it, hoping nobody had noticed your lingering gaze. Still, you do dream. Not extravagantly, not in vivid colour. But your imagination possesses its own hidden space. And sometimes, when the curtains are drawn and the coals have turned to ash, it opens a small forgotten door. Tonight, perhaps, it is already creaking open. Your thoughts begin to wander. The familiar language of Ms. Clarabelle fades into other sounds, ones not written, not approved. You do not resist them. They are brief, only a suggestion of a story beneath the main narrative, a phantom on the edge of a different phantom. The pillow beneath your head has accepted your shape. The sheets no longer feel restrictive, they feel weightless. And your mind, once tied down by rules and ribbons, begins to ascend slowly, safely, within its limits. Because even if your evening reading never violates the rules, your sleep might allow a slight bending of them. The book is closed, the coals are cold, the house is settled into its deepest silence, that rare and valuable state where even the floorboards appear to be resting. But you, despite the calming fragrance, the warm socks, and the approved narrative, are not fully asleep, because there's always one final detail to address just before sleep, in that strange little moment when the mind is drifting but not yet completely gone. Victorians often turned to last-minute chores, small, quiet, useful tasks meant to make the following day run slightly smoother. They were not difficulties. They were nighttime companions. You reach for the small sewing supplies tucked in the drawer beneath your water pitcher. The light is gone, but your hands recall the shapes instantly. You take out a needle already threaded with white thread and locate the slightly loose hem at your sleeve cuff. Just 2 tiny stitches, nothing more is required. Victorian homes trained young women to be productive, even during rest. You were often told that night is when cleverness goes unnoticed, so you learned to keep a small pile of things that needed mending by your bedside. A pair of socks with thinning heels, a collar needing minor reinforcement, a glove with a detached seam on the little finger. Fixing them in the daytime would be inefficient. In the evening they are a quiet diversion, the final actions before total surrender. You sew slowly, deliberately, 2 small stitches. You knot the thread and bite the end as you were instructed. It has a faint scent of soap. On the floor next to you sits your boot brush, just in case you suddenly remembered that the edge of your heel was scuffed. Beside it, a bit of wax for polishing the buttons on your vest or the metal tips of your corset laces. Some women use this quiet time to trim their nails, others to retwist their hair braids so that it dries with a more defined curl. One of your cousins was known for rewinding her daily receipts onto a spool every night, just to keep them in perfect order for the next week's accounting. These moments are not absolutely necessary, but they feel necessary because in a proper household, being useful is a form of protection, something you maintain even in bed. You once heard a maid remark, "Empty hands attract unproductive thoughts." She was not wrong. And so you keep them gently occupied, just until your breathing slows, and your limbs forget they are subject to a schedule. You gently slide the sewing kit back into its drawer, but you do not fully lie down yet. There is a crumpled linen handkerchief at the bottom of the bed, left by accident. Perhaps yours, perhaps folded by a maid. Regardless, it is wrinkled, and you know that if you do not smooth it now, it will be noticed by someone in the morning. So you raise yourself slightly, reach for it, and press it flat between your palms. Your fingers, at this stage, are half asleep themselves, but the routine is automatic. Once, fold into a square, fold again. Tuck into the small pocket on the chair back. Finished. Now the bed invites you again, and this time you have no choice but to accept. You sink back into the pillows, the hem mended, the handkerchief folded, the drawer of mending supplies quietly closed. It is strange how such insignificant things, barely worth mentioning in daylight, assume such importance here in the quiet before sleep. But that is the proper way. Perfection is found in the small details. You settle once more beneath the covers, your hands now resting peacefully on the counterpane, still slightly warm from the quiet activity they have just performed. The air in the room has cooled slightly, enough to make the weight of the blankets feel deserved. From somewhere outside the room comes the softest sound of a bell being disarmed for the night, a faint click of a chain. Then silence. Everything is prepared. And then you recall the stew, you do not know why. Perhaps it was the neatness of folding the handkerchief. Perhaps it is the lingering taste of clove from your nightcap. But your thoughts drift back to the kitchen and to the pot of leftover stew sitting on the lower shelf of the scullery. You saw it during dinner, ignored by nearly everyone. Carrots too soft, gravy slightly watery, and the turnip still hard in the centre. Yet custom dictates it will be served again tomorrow, warmed up, perhaps with an added spoonful of barley to hide the repetition. You wonder if anyone remembered to cover it, or if even now the cook's assistant is silently walking into the pantry to place a cloth over the pot. If she forgets, the scent will permeate the house by the morning, and someone, most likely your aunt, will remark that the air is heavy. It is peculiar, the things your mind focuses on before sleep. Not the significant events, not the discussion about the stock market at dinner, or the shared look with the girl in the green shawl. No, just the stew, the small details that ground a day to a specific location. You blink slowly, your vision blurred by the approach of sleep. The embroidered border of your pillow slips momentarily out of focus. Your mind drifts further now. Quick glimpses of boots drying by the hearth, a misplaced spoon in the silver drawer, a spot of wax that never entirely came off the dining table. It is these final, gentle thoughts that accompany most nights in this era. Not worries, not profound realizations, just soft observations, like loose threads in the dark. You turn smoothly onto your side, no further adjustment necessary. The bed has finally yielded to you, or you to it. One hand rests outside the blanket, palm facing up, completely relaxed. You can feel the slight chill of the air there, just enough to distinguish between skin and sheet. There are no more buttons to examine, no more ribbons to adjust, no more stockings to smooth out. The mending is complete, the reading is done, the servant bell cord hangs still, the house breathes quietly, and now, at last, so do you. The room has entered a state beyond mere quiet, a kind of suspended stillness, as if time itself has paused out of respect. Even the clock on your dresser seems to hesitate between each beat. Sleep is almost here, and yet your eyes snap open because somewhere, hidden in the layers of your subconscious mind, you recall one more thing you intended to do. Check the stew pot? No, the bell cord. That is already taken care of. Ah yes, the hem of your nicest petticoat. You promised yourself you would fix it tonight. You even placed it deliberately on the chair, a silent, folded reminder. But now, in the comforting weight of bedtime, it seems impossibly far away. You reassure yourself it can wait, and it can. But the proper mind is not predisposed to procrastination. You sit up just slightly and peer through the gap in your bed curtains toward the silhouette of the chair. There it is, white, crisp, creased from where you set it down this afternoon. The hem is barely coming loose, but you know it is coming loose, and that means it must be fixed before your next formal gathering, which, if you remember correctly, is tea with a Mrs. Pembroke on Thursday. You lie back down, tell yourself again tomorrow, it will still be there. But now your thoughts are hovering at the brink of that mental drop. Once one small task appears in your head, the others begin to line up. You still have not replaced the paper in your drawer liners. You intended to replace the broken hairpin in your vanity tray. You never found the other glove from your walking set, the one with the mother-of-pearl button that always gets stuck. Your attention shifts to your boots. You are almost certain you did not check them for marks. The sole of the left one has been catching recently. If it is not addressed soon, someone will notice. Someone always notices. In most households, this is the actual final hour. Not for falling asleep, but for recalling that strange, dimly lit corner of the night where nothing can be accomplished, and yet everything demands to be mentally reviewed. You turn gently in bed. The sheets, now warm, offer a sleepy resistance to your movement. You imagine the entire house doing the same thing. Maids curled on simple cots, valets pressed against rough blankets in back hallways, someone in the kitchen tossing under the pressure of a to-do list only half finished. Even the silverware seems to be resting with a wary eye open. This is why so many people keep a pencil and a piece of paper by the bed, not for creative writing or correspondence, but for lists. Practicality never rests, and the mind, conditioned by routine, refuses to stop reporting deficiencies. You do not reach for a pencil. You simply whisper the list to yourself, once, slowly, in order. Hem, glove, boots, drawers, pin. You repeat it softly, then allow it to fade into the softness of your pillow. It will either be remembered in the morning or return tomorrow night. In either case, the house and all the obligations it entails will still be waiting. You exhale slowly, the kind of breath that comes not from sheer fatigue, but from a release, from accepting the reality that not everything will be finished tonight. Not every glove will be found, not every petticoat hem will be sewn, and that is acceptable. Not openly, of course. The proper household would never acknowledge such a thing. But somewhere between the regular ticking of the hallway clock and the soft impression of the mattress beneath your back, you find the smallest hint of leniency. You roll smoothly onto your back. Your legs are now resting straight, no longer coiled with intention. One foot shifts under the counterpane, brushing the slowly cooling bed brick near the bottom. You feel a faint touch of warmth. It is stabilizing, a reminder of humanity even within all the strictness. The night does allow a measure of softness. You think of other people's unfinished tasks scattered silently throughout the house. A scullery maid may have left a spoon unpolished. A valet may have forgotten to empty a coat pocket. A cook may have allowed the yeast to rise too long. But the house still stands. The walls still hold fast. Perhaps that is the silent grace of the Victorian night. Perfection is the aspiration, but incompleteness is the truth everyone secretly understands. And in that shared knowledge there is a quiet comfort. You fold your hands softly over your chest, a position so frequently practiced it no longer feels unnatural. The room is still dark, but it's not overwhelming. The edges of the wardrobe merge into the wall. The lace trim on your pillow scratches faintly at your cheek, but it is a familiar scratch, like the rough surface of a tree you have often rested against. You imagine the hem of your petticoat still resting on the chair, untouched, and instead of feeling guilt, you feel almost affectionate toward it. It has waited for you once. It will wait again. A loose thread does not cause the entire garment to unravel. It simply awaits its turn, like everything else in this house. Like you. You close your eyes now, truly, this time, not out of obedience, but because your body has finally reached the point where it is willing to stop controlling things. The lists are quiet. The fabric has stopped scratching. The bed has fully absorbed your weight. From down the hallway, one final sound. A faint metallic snap as the last lock is secured. Perhaps the maid latching the back entrance. Perhaps the butler checking the safe. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the house itself. Releasing a breath. You smile. The to-do list will still be there in the morning, along with the diary, the unmatched gloves, the sewing kit, and the mother-of-pearl button you will eventually reattach, one detail at a time. For now, you have done enough. And in this quiet, deliberate world, enough is a form of quiet satisfaction. You are suspended between sleep and waking now, lost in that dim, weightless realm where thoughts have no sharp edges. But before you transition fully, something shifts again. Not in the room, not in your physical body, but in your memory. You remember the letters. Not the mail from today. The letters stacked neatly on the writing desk in the parlour, waiting for postage. These have age to them, folded carefully, kept in a box beneath your bed, tucked away between two linen nightgowns you don't wear anymore. You seldom take them out, but they cross your mind every night. They hold no secrets, they are not even particularly passionate. Just simple correspondence from people no longer in your orbit. Cousins who relocated to distant towns. Friends who got married, and grew suddenly formal. That girl who boarded the train to Manchester and never came back, except for 2 slightly stained envelopes penned with looping blue ink and far too many exclamation points. You held on to them, not truly for what they contained. You've forgotten most of their message, but the paper itself has a sensation you can't duplicate, the feel of a moment that mattered enough to be set down, a substance heavier than the writing. People in this time were devoted collectors of correspondence, not simply for documentation but for revisiting. Letters were meant to be gone over, like pressed flowers or ribbons of hair. To read one again was not a weakness, it was a form of faithfulness, a daily affirmation that one's affections had not wandered. You remember the day you started hiding them, not out of embarrassment, but out of necessity. You had reviewed one too often in the sitting room and sensed the low warmth of someone observing you. After that, the container went under the bed. Now, as you lie here, still short of sleep but no longer fully aware, you wonder if you should have retrieved one tonight. Just one. Not to review, but to grasp. To remind yourself that there were once other nights, other rooms, other conversations where someone chose specific words just for you. Some people secure letters into the folds of their mattress. Others conceal them in glove compartments or beneath drawer linings. You once heard of a woman who stitched hers into the inner layer of her dressing gown when it became worn. She claimed the quiet murmurs helped her rest. Your letters don't whisper, but their mere presence is sufficient. You visualize the box now, its curved edges, the worn ribbon that keeps it closed. You can sense its gravity even without making contact. And suddenly slumber feels less like a concession and more like a dialogue. Unfinished perhaps, but still held together by pages that were folded and sentiments not quite voiced. You roll softly toward the side of the bed where the container remains hidden beneath you. You don't reach for it, you don't need to. You remember. And sometimes in a house this quiet, remembering is the only noise that counts. You stay still, eyes now shut, but behind your eyelids the letters begin to unfold, not physically, just in your thoughts. That pale blue stationery with the imperfect edge, the signature in brown ink that blurred where someone pressed too hard, a pressed pansy still folded within one of them, flat and brittle as old lace. You never responded to that one, not truly anyway. There had been no cause. The letter hadn't requested a thing. It had merely described the look of the clouds that morning, and how the postmistress had worn her bonnet askew, and how the tea had turned bitter after sitting too long. Just observations. A diary entry with a stamp, but it ended with a phrase that still resonates. I wish I knew what your room looks like at night. And here you are, your room at night. Not magical, not clandestine, just heavy with bedclothes and expectations. Still you imagine what it might look like from the outside, the edge of the counterpane rising gently with your breathing, the faint shape of your elbow resting on the pillow, the small details that don't make it into letters, the quiet things too insignificant to be written. Some people from this era collect their letters like emotional ledgers, each piece a transaction, a measure of affection, of recollection, of yearning. Unused. Yours are a little more disorganized than that, not grouped by date or person, just piled by how they feel. The heavier ones at the bottom, the ones with small flowers or ribbon tucked in the centre, the ones you go for more often than you admit you never read more than one at a time. It seems like a betrayal somehow. You once read about a woman who had a hidden drawer in her bed frame, an actual compartment carved into the wood below the mattress, just shallow enough for a packet of letters tied with blue thread. When she passed away, the maid discovered them. No one ever mentioned what happened to them. You wonder who would find yours, if they'd open them, if they'd recognise who the initials belonged to, if they'd read between the lines and notice how solitary some of the most commonplace letters truly were. You don't feel solitary now. You feel secure, kept company by paper, by writing, by a dozen half-finished dialogues that never required closure. You stir slightly, picturing the box still beneath the bed, the corner of one letter just barely bent. You consider reading it tomorrow, not the entirety, just a line or two. You'll fold it shut again, perhaps put a fresh ribbon around it, perhaps not. Slumber claims you more gently this time, as if it too has paused to read a line, to trace a name, to recall. Because even in a world as structured as this one, where sleep has a routine and beds have guidelines, memory always finds its own way in. Sleep has almost enveloped you now, slow and thick, like syrup pouring through your joints. But just as your body relaxes into the heft of the bed, one final feeling pulls you back. A cold sensation. Not a breeze precisely, but a frigid awareness. A slight change in the air against your fingers, still resting lightly outside the covering. It brings to mind the wind sneaking under a door, or the cool breath of linen not yet warmed by skin. Your eyes remain closed, but your mind is suddenly alert again. You reach without thought, pulling the blanket higher, tucking your hand beneath it. The bed is warm underneath, but that thin boundary where air meets fabric has spoken to your instincts. And in a house of this style, a faint cold whisper is never disregarded. Because cold, as you were taught, is not just discomfort, it's a danger. There are guidelines, entire books written about proper insulation, the angle of curtain folds, the density of wool padding where the bedpost should be cushioned. You know people who sleep with flannel tied around their knees or wrap their heads in woolen strips to prevent nighttime breezes from entering the ears and causing earaches, or worse, a chill to the brain. Your great-aunt used to place rolled towels along the windowsills to block the air, then tuck a warmed brick beneath the mattress an hour before sleeping. She claimed it kept the bones from aching. You thought it absurd as a child. Now, lying in a room where even still air can surprise, you're starting to understand. You shift again, more carefully this time. The movement releases a minor draft from between the sheets, and you feel it flicker across your collarbone. You pull the counterpane up again, this time to your chin. The wool scrapes faintly at your neck. You don't mind. Warmth is a comfort wrapped in restraint. In truth, most homes from this era are not inherently warm. Fires go out. Stones retain the coldness of long winters. Water freezes in pitchers left too close to the sill. You've woken before to frost drawn across the inside of the window pane, delicate as lace, but far less welcome. And so people make preparations. You once heard of a woman who lined her bed frame with rabbit fur, another who stuffed straw between her mattress and headboard. There are houses where copper wires are wound around bed legs to conduct earth warmth upward, though no one can explain exactly how that works. It just does. You recall a visitor once complaining that he could see his own breath inside. The lady of the house replied, "Yes, but isn't it well contained?" You admired her calmness even as you secretly rubbed your hands together beneath the table. The reality is, people from this time do not expect comfort. They evade discomfort. And so do you. You curl up tighter now, your knees drawn up, your shoulders covered, the curve of your spine held close beneath the bedding. The edge of the bed feels distant. The chair, the wardrobe, the letters, even the stew, all have faded. You're alone with your breathing and the slight coldness that reminded you once again that in this world, even warmth must be earned. The cold lingers, not sharp anymore, just present, like a guest that hasn't spoken but declines to depart. You move again, softly now, as if your slightest motion might upset the air. And then your mind does what it always does at this hour. It wanders to solutions. You think of Mrs. Lawton from number 12, who trusts in placing a pinch of ground mustard between two socks and heating it near the fireplace. Not to eat, naturally. To sleep with, pressed to the soles of her feet. It brings the heat up from the ground, she says. You're not sure if that's science or metaphor. Then there's the gentleman who designed the woolen hand, warmer for men, like a muff, but respectable. He claimed cold hands led to cold emotions, which led to marital distance, which led eventually to national decline. You're nearly certain he was serious, and you remember the story of one woman who slept in a hollowed-out goose-feather nest stitched from old pillows and discarded cloaks. She was never sick, they said, also never wed. Maybe those two facts are connected. A smile begins to form but vanishes as you recall your mother's ritual before bed each evening. She would smooth the coverlet to your chin, then settle her palm lightly on your brow for a moment. Not to test for fever, simply to gauge the warmth. The skin feels it first, before the rest of you, she used to claim. You accepted this. You still do, because it is the faintest air movement that defeats you. Not a roaring gale, but the slight ribbon of cold slipping through the keyhole's gap. That is how the feeling starts. A tight neck, a dull throbbing in the jaw. The type of chill that doesn't cause shaking but makes you short-tempered, fragile, slow. This is why Victorians go to such lengths, to contain the warmth. Flannel nightwear, heavy window drapes, hearth rugs, those peculiar padded cylinders they name draft excluders, which resemble sleeping serpents coiled across the door sill. You picture yours now, lying along the bottom of the door, pressed tightly against the floorboards, just cloth and sawdust. Yet somehow it feels like the ultimate defence against the night. You feel warmer now. The wool at your collar has adapted to your temperature. The warming brick has cooled to match your body heat. Even the cushion has become pliant in the centre. The cold remains outside, but it is absent here, and that is sufficient. You let out a breath, one of those deep, full-body exhalations that start somewhere beneath the ribs and conclude in the toes. Your fingers are finally still. Your breathing has found an even rhythm. You can no longer make out the fires popping in the sitting room or the footsteps from the floor above. What is left is quietness. A quietness that is not empty but cloaked in cloth and effort and custom. A quietness that has been sewn and sterilised and fastened shut against. A quietness that signifies you have done everything possible. You are warm. You are secure. And that, in the Victorian darkness, is nothing less than a victory. The quietness is complete now, substantial. Not menacing, just absolute. You float within it like a bar of soap in a basin, light, undisturbed. But within this muffled stillness, another sensation awakens. Not discomfort, not fear. It is perception. You become aware of your physical body once more. Not only the parts that are warm under the blanket, but the ones pushing against firmer objects, the shoulder touching the mattress ridge, the ankle resting over the warming brick, the very tip of your nose, cool like china. And you realise what you have on. Victorian sleepwear is a complex issue. It is not soft fleece or smooth silk. It is form, layer, intent. Your nightdress, though described as simple, is a cotton garment that reaches the knee, with cuffs that are embroidered, seams that are reinforced, and tiny shell buttons along the neckline. Over this, a shawl of wool, not for decoration. Underneath, perhaps a linen shift if the temperature is low, perhaps even knitted stockings rolled halfway down the calves. You have known women who wear sleeping caps, not pretty ones. Snug, delicate fabric creations that absorb oil from the hair and shield the scalp from sudden drafts. Some assert they alleviate headaches. Others say they keep the brain from getting too cold. That is the kind of reasoning Victorians employ. Whether it is fact matters less than whether it seems logical. You consider the smell of your sleep clothes. Faint starch, a trace of lavender from a sachet kept in the drawer. And always, always a ghost of chimney smoke. Not unpleasant, just authentic. A scent that suggests this person survived the day. Your sleeves gather slightly as you shift position. They are cut looser than necessary, because one never knows when night attire might also serve as sick room clothing. You once spent a week resting in bed, recovering from a persistent winter rash, and by the end, the sleeves felt more natural than your own arms. Sleepwear for a Victorian is not about slumber, it is about readiness. You might be summoned to the drawing room, called to a relative's bedside, pulled into a hallway argument regarding shortages of candle wax. Your attire must be proper enough to receive visitors even while in bed. There was once a woman in Kensington who kept a velvet ribbon close to her cushion, so if ever roused, she could fasten it around her collar before sitting up. It gave the impression of preparation, she would say. You admired her for that. You think of her now as you touch the border of your sleeve. The seams are firm, the cuffs are generous. There is reassurance in that. The room is cooler than before, but your layers endure. The fire has long since faded to embers, but your breathing is steady. And as the weight of the day withdraws, you begin to contemplate not what you are wearing, but what it means to be dressed for sleep. Not naked, not vulnerable, not casual, but enveloped in attention, in procedure, in customs, stitched into cotton and muslin. You are not just a person in a bed, you are a person still abiding by the structure. The rules, even in this place. You pull the shawl tighter around your shoulders, and something minor yet comforting settles into place. The edge of the material falls perfectly across your elbow. Your sleeve bunches slightly at the wrist, but not enough to worry about. It is the type of flaw that feels organic, that suggests this is lived in comfort, not deliberate grace. Victorian sleepwear, after all, is not only for heat. It is a signal, one of the last, before sleep takes away the day. A final personal uniform that no one sees, yet you still wear correctly. Because how you sleep is, in many respects, how you exist. When no one is watching, you consider the details that others overlook but matter to you. The satin piping on your sleeping shawl, worn thin from years of fingers tracing the same corner. The small stitch symbol your aunt added to the hem of your nightdress, even though no one but you would ever notice it. The fact that you never button the highest button, not out of idleness, but because it always felt too formal. Some Victorians regard this bedtime dressing so seriously that there are printed guides outlining acceptable nocturnal appearances. You once encountered a sentence that said, "To be improperly dressed for one's dreams is to invite chaos into the mind." At the time, you laughed. Now you are not so certain. Because tonight, like countless others, you feel more composed after preparing for sleep than before. The process of dressing, of wrapping, of carefully folding back the covers has affected you. It is not merely habit, it is ceremony. And ceremony, no matter how insignificant, provides order to the aspects of life you cannot regulate. You lie still, one foot angled softly against the bed warmer. You trace the shape of a cuff against your thigh. Somewhere, far away, a clock chimes. Just once. You count the reverberation in your mind, but you do not note the hour. It is irrelevant now. This is your time. Your body is covered and enclosed in softness. Your thoughts no longer rush. Even your breath has adopted the steady pace of flannel. Slow, warm, intentional. And in this moment, you recall a saying your grandmother once used. Night clothes are for tranquility. Day clothes are for defence. You did not grasp her meaning then. You do now. Because everything about this, your garments, your shawl, your slow release of breath into the folds of your sleeve, reminds you that you are no longer in conflict with the world. You are no longer expected to articulate, to labour, to withstand. Now you are permitted simply to be. As you adjust slightly in bed, the nightdress whispers softly, not loud, not distracting, just enough to let you know it remains there, supporting you. And in a world as formal and complex as this one, sometimes the greatest comfort is knowing something still fits. The very last moments before sleep are the most quiet of all. Not because the house is hushed, although it is. Not because the bed is motionless, though it is, but because you have nothing left to adjust. Every corner of the blanket has been smoothed. Every garment rests precisely so. The shawl no longer slides. The fire has dimmed to its faintest flicker, and your mind, for once, has ceased to reach. This is the part of the Victorian night few people mention. Not the activity of undressing or the oddness of bedtime rituals, but this, the stillness, after every rule has been observed. There is a sense to it, like standing at the edge of something immense, but instead of apprehension, you feel prepared. You consider your bedroom not merely as a location, but as a silent ally. The wallpaper with its faded flowers repeating endlessly into the shadows, the washstand still cool from your earlier cleansing. The curtains pulled shut with an experienced hand, their trim brushing the sill like a farewell. Everything in its correct place, every place secured. Victorians are often accused of being overly concerned with structure, and perhaps that is true. But lying here now, wrapped in warmth and quiet, you begin to appreciate the sense in it, because structure grants permission. Permission to rest, permission to stop needing to prove yourself, permission to release the day. The clock's steady sound becomes your companion now, no longer a reminder of tasks unfinished, but a gentle indication that time continues, even when you pause. You do not need to be anywhere else. You do not need to utter anything more. You do not even need to think. You remember something peculiar your neighbour once shared. She claimed that the key to sound sleep was to imagine yourself as part of the furnishings. A chair does not worry, she said. A table does not shift and turn restlessly. It sounded foolish then, but you attempt it now. You let your limbs relax like carved timber. Let your head settle heavily on the cushion like a teacup, set down carefully after use. You even visualize your body outlined, like a figure in a drawing, traced in soft lead, labelled at rest. There is comfort in that ridiculous small idea, not because it is sensible, but because it is gentle. And perhaps gentleness is what the Victorians truly sought all along. Not theatrics, not severity for its own sake, but a feeling of deserved tranquillity. A tranquillity that only arrives after you have lit the hearth, boiled the water, arranged the cushions, selected the proper nightdress, tucked the correspondence away, heated the bricks, secured the shawl, smelled the lavender, checked for air leaks, straightened the bedspread, and lowered the gaslight just enough to trust the dark. And now there is nothing remaining to do but sleep. The room has vanished, not literally, of course. It is still present in all its dimly lit, softly shifting familiarity, but your consciousness of it has faded. You no longer follow the outline of the cabinet or the faint sound of the curtains. Even the gentle thud of the hot water bottle shifting near your feet has retreated into the background. What remains now is you and something even more silent. Sleep has not yet arrived, but it is nearby. And in this final phase, your thoughts become small, simple. Not in what they contain, but in their significance. You are no longer replaying what you said earlier or what you neglected to do. Instead, your mind attends to smaller things. The sensation of the linen seam against your shoulder, the way your breath touches the wool shawl, the faint metallic smell from the bed frame. These are the final sentries of awareness, tiny feelings maintaining watch until sleep comes and relieves them. You remember someone once telling you that Victorians believed dreams were determined by the position in which you slept. Right side up, pleasant dreams. Left side down, unusual ones. On your back, terrible nightmares. You are unsure if anyone truly believed that, but it still crosses your mind every time you roll over. You select your side now, the same one you always do. It is not logical. It simply feels right. It always has. You wonder how many others are doing the same at this exact moment. Somewhere in Bloomsbury, a banker adjusting his bed socks. In Yorkshire, a child murmuring to the doll beside her cushion. In Bath, an elderly woman checking the window latch one last time before sinking into a haven of flannel and confidence in routine. You will never encounter them, but somehow you are connected. Because there is something deeply shared about the process of sleep in this world. For all the solitary preparation, for all the individual fussing and folding, this moment right here, this yielding, is communal, like a city inhaling deeply. And tomorrow this same body will rise again, It will pour the tea, fasten the boots, retrieve the newspaper, tolerate the drafts, write the letters, and carry out the daily performance of Victorian correctness. But not now. Now nothing is expected of you. No opinion to maintain, no corset to tighten, no dialogue to navigate. Just the gradual dissolution of awareness, like a page curving inward at the edges. You let out one last breath, not because you are troubled, but because you're finished, and the sigh communicates everything necessary, that the day has been confronted, that the rituals were honoured, that the cold was kept at bay, that even in this complex, constrained, perpetually cautious world, you found a way to rest, and that, in the end, is a kind of quiet triumph. And now, with the final light long extinguished and the last layer of thought folded away, you lie there, still, slow, wrapped in your own rhythm. The weight of the covers no longer presses, but holds, like the hand of someone who knows you are secure. The air against your cheek is neither warm nor cool, just constant, familiar. The clock's soft sound no longer measures time, it measures distance, gently guiding you away from the concerns of the day. Everything that had to be done is already accomplished. You lit the fire, you warmed the bricks, you arranged your nightdress and positioned the shawl exactly so. You followed the peculiar small customs that thousands before you have practiced night after night, not because they were stylish, but because they worked. Because even a life full of rigid propriety and rough wool can still offer a kind of peace. One that is not loud or grand, but gentle, earned. And now it is your turn to drift into the quiet. No need to move, no need to think. Just allow yourself to float in that slow, delightful descent into nothing, like lace slipping off a hook, like tea cooling in the cup, like the sound of a page turning in a book that knows it does not need to end. Let your mind soften, let your breathing settle. Let the story sink into the cushion with you. You have done enough. Sleep is ready.